Hypocrisy.
Oh boy, what's up, guys? Welcome to Law Splaining the Interwebs. I am your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And how wild it is that my old ass intro that probably needs to be updated just became so fucking appropriate. Isn't that funny? Like hilarious? Isn't it just really fucking great that the Democrats have been demagoguing the murder of Donald Trump or whatever for so fucking long? And Donald Trump, what he did was he said, fight like hell for your rights, of course. Fight like hell for your rights is what he asked people to do. And that was enough to apparently make Trump guilty of inciting an insurrection in Democrats who wanted to remove him from office and punish him for the rest of fucking time. But all of their rhetoric is suddenly okay. It's all just fine. None of them were actually talking about killing Donald Trump or anything like that. And now, of course, they condemn, oh my God, we condemn the shooter's actions. Well, do you? Do you? Well, I'll be consistent and I'll say that unless someone was actually orchestrating the assassination of Donald Trump, their political opinions should be 100% protected. Consistency is hard. Hard like an incited erection. But that being said, we've got a lot to talk about. I was not around as all this news fucking broke. Gordon G says, so now you're Trump. What are you talking about, homie? I'm literally talking about the fact that Democrats demagogue the murder of their political opponents all the time. But when Trump said fight like hell, he was guilty of a crime. But now none of them have anything to do with the assassination attempt. I'm no way comparing myself to Donald Trump. I have both ears still. That was rude. Poor Donald. He'll probably get that thing fixed, though. Ears? I don't even need ears. I don't need to hear what other people's opinions are. They're not very good. I've seen opinions. I've heard opinions. Couple good opinions. They really say, I've talked to a lot of people. I've got great opinions about things. But yeah, it's amazing to see this happen and to see kind of just the difference in how everything changes, changing a D to an R or an R to a D. And you keep wanting the country to like get past that, the news media, you keep wanting people to get past these things and be like, can we just acknowledge that you guys are in the fucking tank and I'll be honest about it? And that's fine. And they're still like, no, we're fair and balanced. Well, as we know about fair and balanced, that's one way to tip the fucking scales. But that's none of my business. Anyway, how's it going, guys? How are you? Correction 101, 18 months as a member, says, looking and sounding good. Nikki, hey, thanks, brother. And Moncor has been a member for 40 fucking months. Thank you very much. Oh, man. There's so much to talk about, mainly tonight. Robert Barnes is supposed to be joining me in a little bit, hopefully. Waiting for him to become available. Actually, I might want to send this another way just in case. So give me a second. But Robert Barnes should be joining me to talk about Donald Trump's assassination attempt, to talk about the Baldwin Brady violation, because this thing is really amazing. Baldwin's Brady violation is a manslaughter case, a man's laughter case, getting thrown out because the government fucked up. And that's how it should be. And I'm of the, people are going to obviously talk to me about my bias here, but that's fine. I've been this way for a long time. I'm actually of the opinion that government fuck ups should always end up with the type of result that Alec Baldwin got. I don't care about the politics of the person involved. I don't care about the crime. If the government fucks up in your criminal prosecution, your case should be dismissed. Now, there's something called a harmless error doctrine, which is the catch-all for a lot of prosecutors not being good at their job. And that's where, oh, well, we did fuck up, but it didn't harm the other party. And that harm is narrowly defined as somehow like infringing an enumerated constitutional right and nothing else. And so oftentimes prosecutors will fuck up like crazy and they'll skirt by on this harmless error doctrine, and judges who are too fucking afraid to actually hold the prosecution's office and the police accountable. But here in this case, they fucked up. And when you fuck up as the government, you got to go. You got to go. So we'll be talking to Robert Barnes, hopefully about Trump's assassination attempt, what it means, what the rhetoric and temperature is. We'll also be talking about Baldwin, Brady, and other stuff. But while we wait, I guess I have a special update for you guys, something I'm not normally doing because I have to talk very carefully about my own personal issues because court is ongoing. And so I have to be very careful. But I do want to correct something that is what I'll call a misunderstanding of Minnesota law that was released yesterday. All right. So if you have not heard, some documents in my case just keep getting released. It's amazing. It's very, very interesting how that keeps happening. But that being said, particular set of documents came out and people don't understand how Minnesota law works. So I will politely correct them because no one should know this. No one should know how this works. Goody, this stream is actually not live on Rumble because Rumble thinks I have a stream going somewhere. I don't know where it is, but they just do. But people don't understand how Minnesota family law works in juvenile protection matters. So I'm going to explain it in very high level, no specifics about my case, because I want people to understand what they're seeing a little bit. So what was released or leaked in my case are what's called long-term placement plans. And Minnesota has a rule in child custody matters. Minnesota has a timer, a very strict timer, that by 364 days from the time that a child is removed from parents' custody, the government has to have already made all of their decisions about what will happen with the child. So what they do is to get around the fact that doing all this takes a lot of time. And some people will be like compliant for a long time and then screw up at the end, or be really big screw ups at the beginning and be compliant at the end. They have to go ahead and do what's called concurrent planning. So what you have is what's happening in reality. And then the government also has to generate these long-term care plans, typically out of placement or out of home placement plans, in the event that they need to keep the children for longer than this 364-day timeline. Okay. They have to have this filed, and there are deadlines. Our deadline for the government filing those plans in my case was July 9th, which is why they were filed on that date. Now, what people erroneously think, and this again is not anyone's fault because you wouldn't know this. Normally, you'd never even see this shit. No one would see this shit in a normal case, but it's me, so it's not normal. Normally, what would happen is these plans would be filed, but there's also what's actually going on, which isn't actually filed. And I know that sounds weird, but that's because there's no necessity of filing it. So people automatically, they saw these documents, and some people assumed that these long-term care plans were the actual trajectory for the placement of my children. I can happily say that that's not true because these long-term care plans are fucking horrifying. They have nothing to do with where we are right now. Now, obviously, I can't talk about any of this stuff, any of the dates or anything like that, but just know that my children will be returning home much sooner than people think. And I get I'm not faulting people for misunderstanding the law, misunderstanding the documents that they're seeing, and misunderstanding the process, and for coming up with very, very negative conclusions about me because they only get one side of the story. And I have two options. I can try and sell you my side of the story and possibly jeopardize or compromise my own case. I could do that, or I can do all my talking in court outside of very specific factual matters that I can that don't have any impact. And for me to say that these long-term care plans were filed on July 9th because that's when the timeline was, and that we are nowhere near that long-term care trajectory. In fact, we have a much faster timeline. There's nothing wrong with me saying that. Now, of course, anything can change, right? Like, this is child custody and the government has a lot of leeway. For example, if I go on a giant meth bender, probably going to change the timeline and move towards that other long-term planning. But assuming everything remains the same, it won't be anywhere fucking near that. So I just wanted to clear that up because I know like there's some people out there who just genuinely don't understand Minnesota family law, especially juvenile protection. It's a highly specialized practice area. And if you're not in it, you're just not going to know. And then there's some other like fat, lumpy retards out there who are reading documents thinking that they're making some sort of bold statement and they're making grandiose stuff while trying to deflect from their own problems. Like, those people are out there too. You'll have to figure out who those people are. I just know that generally speaking, that happens. But in my case, I also know the truth. And unfortunately, for me, I guess, is I can't share that truth with you until everything's fucking locked down. Until the court cases are resolved, it's just too damn risky. And in fact, I can't even really talk about people in these cases and the shit that I've seen happen, or the shit that has been done, people saying stuff either publicly or privately. I can't talk about any of that because any of these potential witnesses that are out there, obviously I can't make anything that could be seen in any way as some sort of intimidation or threat or whatever. No matter if they do it or not, I can't, because the government will fist me if I do. So when people I was talking to a friend, they're like, well, you could share your side of the story, like just on these things. And I'm like, no, I actually can't. I can't talk about any of this stuff. And I do have to let people just kind of say what they're going to say. And it sucks, but that's the wise thing to do. So again, there are obviously exceptions. I've talked, like even today, I've talked about something in my case. What I'm talking about is highly specific, specifically fact-oriented, and a general principle of Minnesota law. And I'm happy to say that people's speculation about that, while again founded in their own knowledge and their own access to information, is fine. It just happens to be incorrect. So, but all that, those updates will come as reality settles into place and court cases are wrapped up, and it'll be great. So cheers to all of you, though, for taking such an interest in my life. Again, I really hope that one day I get to tell the entire fucking story in some capacity, unshackled by the specter of lawsuits that are ongoing. So, in the meanwhile, I'm not begrudging people their opinions. I'm not begrudging people their conclusions. I can't offer up arguments against them. So sorry, but I appreciate you guys watching, hanging out, making fun of me or not. It's okay. So, all right, let's hit a couple of these super chats and then we'll start. I do have a couple other stories. I would like to save the Trump assassination talk for Barnes. I do want to do that. Where the fuck? Hold on. Did I? Oh, here we go. There we go. I didn't actually, I sent the link to him on Twitter, but I didn't actually send it on the other thing till just now. I'm going to save the main topics for Trump, but I have been saving up some topics as well. Good stuff to talk about, and it may have overlap with these things. I don't know, but we're going to get into some of this shit. All right. Chris Benoit, a model family man and father. By the way, what's really funny is like, it's not funny. None of this is actually funny. You have to understand that, like, when I say, it's really funny, and I'm talking about like the plight of my situation, that's not an actual literal thing. That's like there's a gun in my mouth. It's hilarious. But with that, what's funny is finding out like people who have this villain picture of you akin to a Chris Benoit. And you're like, that's insane. But people believe that. And you're like, really? And I'm not talking about the weirdo, like internet people. Like, forgive me, you weirdos. You know who you are. Like, there are people out there who will say stuff and they might mean it and they might not. It's like somewhere between parody, satire, and just shitting on me. And like, they may not actually believe it, or they may. It's impossible to tell, and that's fine. I'm not talking about those people. But when you like start to find out some stuff about like what people think about you when you've been like entirely good to them, it's like, God damn. Well, that sucks. Speaking of great fathers, Chris Benoit says Aaron has been losing his mind in a downward spiral mentally. How long do you think until he goes postal? Again, I'm not commenting anything about Aaron. He is his own man. He gets to say whatever he wants. I hope he makes $1 million. That's it. I can't talk about him. I can't talk about anything related to him, and I don't want to. I don't want to do that at all. Amateur Ant says, I think most people want to know about how April is in bed compared to Kayla. Well, I mean, a lot of people want to know a lot of things, but I'm not the best source of that information. So, they'll probably just wonder forever. Saved by Pope Racket says Barnes' safe word is the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment is everyone's safe word, and you should all remember it. Seize the Day says most don't care for the gossip, wishing for the best. Hey, thank you, Seize the Day. I know a lot of people don't care, and I know it's typically the loudest people who make it seem like people do care, but I care. Like, I care a little bit. It's my family. Like, and they don't deserve half the shit that's happening. Like I say half because some of them do, not my kids, of course, but they don't deserve half the shit that's going on out there. So, it just is. Nick's boyfriend, Johnny, says Barnes is so patriotic. When he quoted the Fourth Amendment, his peen grows 2 sizes bigger. The Fourth Amendment is a favorite of mine. Very interesting amendment. TMF Squid says, thank God the shooter was retardy Oswald. That's good. I like that. Thank you for my belly laugh makes me happier. Otherwise, I don't know where we'd be at today. Did you guys see the Twitter video? I saw it from Kyle Becker. I don't know who made it, but it was basically an analysis of where Trump, like how the bullet just barely missed his head. If he would have been where he was and not turned his head just at the exact moment, he basically would have been domed like Kennedy. Speaking of people who are not shot in the head, I'd like to welcome my guest for the stream, Mr. Barnes.
How goes it?
Loaded question.
Quite literally, right?
Yeah, it goes okay, all things considered. I've got a lot of good news lately, and so with that, that's all good stuff. But
yeah. No, well, I mean, it's amazing that I think their whole plan was to take out the president, to blame Iran, to launch an entire new war and put us on the brink of World War III. And instead, not only did that plan not work, but Trump responded to it by when he stood up and said, fight, fight, fight. That meant he was taking a different direction. He meets with Robert Kennedy, leaks that to the whole world, or however it happened, it leaks to the world a conversation that makes some key political points he needs. And then he picks J.D. Vance. I was talking tonight with Don Jr., with Dan Bongino, Tucker Carlson over at the Rumble studio. And I haven't seen the three of them that excited in a long time, because the counter coup is clearly present. And it's extraordinary how one little turn of the head changed the trajectory of American society and the world.
Oh, and that iconic picture. I mean, he's got blood on his face, pouring out of his ear. He's got his fist up. It's like, okay.
The American flag in the background. I mean, it's amazing. It was like
that should be
part 2.
Yeah, it's like every ad Trump runs needs to have that.
Absolutely.
And that may have won him the presidency. Democrats are terrified
Well, and Elon Musk comes out in favor of him. Bill Ackman comes out in favor of him. 50 Cent is using his memes in rap concerts. I mean, this is a revolutionary shift in public and American mindset.
Yeah. And, there's a whole bunch of expressions that kind of get down to the general idea. But I think the general problem that America has had is a lack of a tangible enemy to unite around. I mean, 9/11 did, for a brief amount of time, and I say brief, probably 3-4 strong years, really united the country. I mean, there's all sorts of shit that happened that maybe wasn't as accurate as they were portraying it, but it didn't matter because the country had a rally point, they had a focus, and they had a target. And one thing that most people can get behind is maybe we don't assassinate politicians. Like maybe we just don't do that. And it's kind of a basic principle. And so having that happen with Trump, that kind of allowed this unification, at least of his base in the Republican Party, to say, no, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. We need to send a message back. Knowing that most Democrats probably don't want Trump literally dead. They want him in prison or whatever, but they don't want him shot in the head on a stage. But this is a way to send a message back to them. Like, you can't do this to our guy. We're going to elect him and you're going to hate it.
Exactly. And I think you saw the fact that he responded in such an iconic, instinctive way that he understood immediately who it was that was out to get him. And that he was sending a message to them and sending a message to his supporters. Here's how you respond to efforts at intimidation. You fight, and resist. I mean, I've never seen him use the fist. Used other images before, but that was the old Black Panthers iconic. You know,
Stormy
what I mean?
might have seen him use the fist. That never happened. No, but it was.
But it was very, like, he knew what he was doing, and you could feel emotionally instinctive. This is who he is at core, and he understood what had happened. He understood why they did it. And he was like, I'm going to fight. I want all of you to fight. And then within, 48 hours, the first business day thereafter, within a half day, he's met with Robert Kennedy, sent out. I mean, like, for example, when that conversation got leaked, you look at who benefits from the leaking of it. Primarily, it's Trump who benefits from the leaking of it. Kennedy's never leaked anything in his life that I'm aware of. So
he's old. Maybe he is.
Possible. But it's his son, Bobby Kennedy III, that does it. And it's not, people should ask themselves, why would it benefit Trump and how it would benefit Trump? Well, why is that part of the conversation being leaked? Why is it like he's talking about the assassination attempt, the weird inquiry Biden made about why did you turn your head, about, the making some statements, but he's doing it
to keep it straight.
Exactly. He's doing it with Robert Kennedy Jr., the most prominent public advocate for the government killing the president and a presidential candidate before. And it's probably not a coincidence he's chosen Robert Kennedy to relay that message out. That he understands what the score is. He understands what the system is up to. And he's going to respond with the best revenge is success. And he's going to answer that. And he answers that with talking to Robert Kennedy. He answers that by his fight. And then he answered that most loudly by picking J.D. Vance for his VP, the one person the entire establishment in the war machine did not want to see as the successor to Donald J. Trump.
Yep. It's great. You mentioned the iconic fist raise reminiscent of the Black Panthers in the 70s. Do you think that was, Trump is a quintessential marketing genius, using his own presence, his own charisma at all times. Do you think that he was literally in that moment going, this will be great with the Africans? Like, do you think he actually cognized that thought of like, because he's always been instinctively better with the African-American community than most Republicans. He relates better to them because he's just good at relating to people. And I kind of wonder how much intentionality in that split second went into what Trump did.
I think it did. I think it was the recognition of who tried to take him out, the recognition that they had failed, and that he has always responded to any effort to intimidate by saying, what is it they want me to do? I'm going to do the opposite of what they want me to do.
Yep.
And they did it when he did that when they impeached him. He was like, okay, you don't want me to be nice to Russia or Putin. Well, I'm going to be nice to Russia and Putin. Screw you. You don't want me to go to war. You want me to go to war in certain places. I'm going to refuse. You want me to not talk about Biden family corruption in Ukraine. Well, I'm going to talk about it twice as much. He knew when they tried to bankrupt him, the goal was to say, hey, just drop out of the election.
Yep.
You know, when they tried to indict him and tried to put him in prison for life, his reaction each instance was, I'm definitely going to run. And now when he knew, okay, they tried to kill me. They tried to kill me on the eve of the convention. That means they care about who the vice presidential choice is. That means they care about me being officially nominated on the ballot. And I think right away it was, okay, I'm going to take away everything that you want. I'm going to give you the exact thing you don't want. And I think that fight was just deeply instinctive. And the fist was the first image that came into his mind as to how to resist, because he grew up during the age of the Black Panthers. I mean, he was a young man during that age. He still remembers the 60s viscerally. But I think it was also meant to be the reason why the black rapper community has always loved Trump is down deep. The man is a black rapper, right? He's just, by his mindset, by his mentality, he
doesn't have a black face, but he has a black heart.
Yeah. Well, in the sense of, he loves the kind of things that, are shiny, gold, over the top. He likes,
he's ostentatious.
Yeah. He likes new money, not old money. He likes gold. He likes gold toilets. He likes gold, whatever. That's Trump. The gold image on the hotels.
Yep.
All that. So I think he's always naturally aligned. He described it. He's always felt better with the truck driver and the taxi cab guy than the upscale crowd of Upper West Manhattan. That isn't the people who occupy Mar-a-Lago. It's new money, not old money at Mar-a-Lago. It's people who've earned their wealth, not people who were given their wealth.
People who eat KFC on a private jet. I mean, like literally, it's like, what? Look, I'm going to bring a bucket of chicken. I could have a private chef make a 5-star meal or 5-course meal on my jet. But
he could be the snob. He could have always been the snob. Like, he is the first president to not join the Bohemian Grove, to not join an elite conventional secret society since John F. Kennedy. I mean, every president since John F. Kennedy has been a member of either Bohemian Grove or another elite country club. He's refused those. He created his own clubs, where it was the razzle-dazzle outsiders. I mean, he got originally in trouble in Palm Beach because of all the different racial and ethnic and religious groups he included at Mar-a-Lago, because it enraged them. He turned Palm Beach into a working-class hero heaven for people who had been successful. And, you're Italian, you're Irish, you're ethnic. That was the kind of people that loved hanging out with Trump. Mm-hmm. And that's who he's always been. And I think what we instinctively saw was the rapper personality of who Trump is. And then everybody rallied to it. Elon Musk rallied to it. Bill Ackman rallied to it. Hedge fund guys, the Winklevoss twins rallied to it. And 50 Cent rallies to it. I mean, if 8 years ago, 2016, could you imagine 50 Cent putting up an image of Trump as an iconic 50 Cent type image at a rap concert and knowing his crowd was going to love it, was going to cheer for it? It's just brilliant by Trump at multiple levels, and a great mistake by the deep state. They needed that shot to be right on target, and it was right on target. It was just Trump turned his head at the right time.
It's also interesting because it's reminiscent of Clinton, resonating with we'll say unconventional demographics. Like, it's not necessarily the youth, but John Mulvaney, Dylan Mulvaney's weird. John, whatever his name is, starts with an M. He's a comedian. And he's hilarious. He tells this long story about when he met Trump as like Bill Clinton as like a 9-year-old. His mom had gone to college with Bill Clinton, and he just talks about like the charisma of Bill Clinton. And one of the things he said that stuck out to me was he's like, Bill Clinton was the first guy to go on MTV, and they're like, "What's your favorite food?" He's like, "I don't know, fries." And like, kids are like, "Yes, French fries. Why? We don't need all these people." And it's that ability that Bill Clinton had to relate to the everyman out there, even though like he's a Southern aristocrat, but he's still, well, he could swing the ladies, no problem, but he could also just relate to a guy who worked a blue collar job, and he could relate to the youth who were coming into the vote at that time. And Trump has the same sort of characteristics as a personality there. He's just larger than life. And like you said, it's very akin to how rappers are and how rappers present. And Trump has no problem being ostentatious and forward about it. And I think that's why I like him. so much is because like this guy's just funny. And like you're like, I don't always agree, but every time he says something, I laugh.
Yeah. Oh, he's entertaining, he's engaging, he's human. I thought we saw the deepest side of him in that response to him being taken out.
Right.
I mean, like most people would be terrified, most people would be scared, most people would be frightened, most people would be intimidated. Most people would say, "Just drag me out to the car and let me get out of here." A lot of people would step down, realizing the scope of the risk. And his response was to make sure his audience knew that he knew what the score was, and it was the primitive emotion and how he does that fight. I mean, I was watching. I was like, I'm ready to run through a wall. I'm ready to go. I mean, it was
right.
inspiring.
It is, and it's also one of the things we talk a lot about, or we've been talking a lot about, how calculating and just intuitively smart Trump is in this type of field, in this type of environment. But at the same time, I get a sense of the deep level of personal offense that Donald Trump has had towards these things. Now, people have characterized him as like a man baby or like immature or whatever, but you got to understand, like, this is a guy who's built his life. All he's done is try to do his thing. He's employed hundreds of thousands of people. He's built this business empire. He ran for the presidency. In his mind, you may not like him as president, but in his mind, he's trying to better the country, trying to do these things. And the thanks he's gotten is to be federally indicted, state indicted, convicted of felonies, maligned. Now they tried to kill him. And it's just like, I'm just giving you me. I'm just being Donald Trump, and you got to fucking try and kill me over it. And it's that personal offense kind of came through with his response to me too. It's like, look, this is too far. Even for how ridiculous I am, this is too far. And I think that resonates with people as well, because anybody who's been in their own life just trying to do their thing, and someone comes and shuts them down at a job site, lays them off, badmouths them, gets them removed from something, all those people feel the same. They're like, I was trying to do the right thing here. I was trying to do a good thing. And someone just comes on and screws it all up for no reason. And I mean, it pisses people off. That's the kind of shit that's going to get people killed.
Yeah. And I think you saw in the response of Bill Ackman, Elon Musk, all these other, the Winklevoss twins, the Andersons, the big hedge fund guys, the Silicon Valley guys, the 50 Cent guys, they recognize the same thing. They're like, I know what that is. I know what you're trying to do to them. I relate to it. I connect to Trump. I relate to what Trump is experiencing. I relate to being a victim of that kind of attack. And it's enough is enough. And the thing has gone too far. And I think it's the deep state, the political establishment has so lost control of the script, so lost control of the narrative, that I think they really thought if this assassination had worked, that everything would be fine for them. And it's like, no, it would have been a disaster. You have no idea the blowback that was coming.
Well, I think it's indicative of the small scale stuff that we've been talking about. The kind of internet commentary community has been talking about for years with cancel culture. People are all too happy to just go after someone because they don't like an opinion or they don't like something. And they're happy to just reach into their private lives and try and fuck them over. And it's weird because it's celebrated constantly. Like, I'm going to get him. I'm going to go after that guy. I'm going to call his manager. I'm going to call whoever. I want to find out where he works. And they want to do this constantly. And it's like, this was not an acceptable practice prior to the internet. It was largely, one, it was really difficult to do. And two, it was uncouth to reach into people's personal lives over disagreements. But now it's become commonplace. And so you see people trying to do the ultimate cancellation of Donald Trump is, you're going to delete him because you don't like his political opinions. And of course, some people are like, well, yeah, like that's reasonable. It's like, that was not reasonable. And it's weird to see the microcosm burst into the highest levels of American politics, where we look like a third world country with an assassination attempt on a political leader. It's like, we're supposed to be well past this. Like, Trump, no matter how much you hate him, he is not a Joseph Stalin. Like, he is not these horrific tyrants of the past. You just don't like his tax policy. Come on.
Well, it's amazing. It reminded me of Huey Long. So Huey Long, the great legendary populist governor of Louisiana, he originally tried to work within the system. He wasn't trying to crush the Rockefeller machine, the Standard Oil machine that ran the state. the old school Democratic political machine out of New Orleans that ran New Orleans, the old corrupt corporate oligarchs who ran the state legislature in Baton Rouge. But then they tried to impeach him. And he rallied success. They got a round robin. He got personal guarantees, stuck him in a safe to make sure it was delivered. And he survived it. And what he told people later was, I used to try to work with them. Now I just try to crush them. Because they're not only an enemy to me, they're an enemy to all freedom and liberty and peace, prosperity in my state. I think by trying to take out Trump in the way they did, Trump got the message. And now Trump is going to be a much more effective advocate against them than he ever would have been otherwise. He would have tried to work with them again in a second term. He isn't someone who really wants to radically reshape things. He just has some core ideas that thinks he'll make life a little better for people. And he's willing to make massive personal sacrifices for that. And he was willing, I think, even to tolerate the efforts to impeach him, the stolen election, the efforts to bankrupt him, the ridiculous sexual assault allegations against him, the preposterous bankruptcy of him, the ludicrous legal actions, the criminal indictments.
Well, we're going to talk about some of those.
Yeah, all of which are insane. But then you try to kill him on top of it. And it's not a coincidence he reacted the way he did. I mean, J.D. Vance was the best possible VP he could have picked. Talking to Robert Kennedy was a very smart political move. And I think you aggregate it and accelerating everything, making sure the nomination all took place Monday. So he's guaranteed legally on the ballot. They can't remove him now anymore.
Yep.
That J.D. Vance is now his successor. Can't change that anymore. They accelerated I keep trying to explain to people, these are like the let them eat cake generation. These are people who truly do not understand working class America. Yep. They've used to wielding power in this ruthless authoritarian way. Another comparison would be late Soviet Union empire. You know, the Romanian president and these other people who thought, wouldn't this work? And they're shocked when it no longer works. That this deep state doesn't. I mean, that some of the nonsense excuses that DEI hire at the head of the Secret Service. Oh, sloped roof. We couldn't put someone on there for safety reasons. Well, what nonsense are you used to lying about? Everybody knows you were complicit in it. Everybody knows what was going on. And your excuse is an excuse that nobody would buy other than like your university DEI professor. I mean, so I think that they have unleashed the best of Trump.
When they just missed the boat with how prominent social media became so quickly. I think you can relate to this, one, in the social media world, but also in the legal world, because when you watch lawyers, judges, courtrooms, administrators try and deal with social media, they still have no idea. And that's the same as newsrooms around America wondering why. I was talking about Forbes magazine the other day. It's like Forbes used to be the magazine you would get in first class and start reading because it had everybody in first class was reading the business section of Forbes, looking for how to, tips on networking, expanding their business, marketing ideas, new products, all of that stuff. Forbes now is just the same clickbait farm that everybody else is, because they all failed to recognize the democratization of information. And since they missed that boat, they just thought that their ivory towers were insulated from everything. And of course we can control the narrative. What idiot in the news was it who's like, they didn't get to tell people what to think. That's our job. Do you remember that quote? It was
it was what's her name on MSNBC?
Mika
the daughter of the famous Secretary of State or Defense for Carter.
Yeah,
that thought he could coordinate, and handle the Cold War in a certain manner. And she's the same. And Joe Scarborough, who whacked his intern. I mean, officially had nothing to do with it. His intern just died under mysterious circumstances.
The Spacey treatment.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. So I mean, it's and MSNBC was so terrified that they would go on and do something incredibly stupid that they didn't even let them appear on Monday. That's how nervous they were that Joe Scarborough and she couldn't keep their mouth shut. I mean, look at Tenacious D. I have no doubt he thought that would be popular. I mean, just 8 years ago, you have Kathy Griffin holding up a bloodied head of Donald Trump. You have, Snoop Dogg shooting him in the head. You have Eminem saying he's going to take him down. And they had so misread the political dynamic that they thought that Tenacious D thought he could go. And all he did was cancel himself overnight, because every venue is like, we can't insure this. You're the idiot that just celebrated an assassination attempt on a president.
What was it was funny when it was a rap diss track, right? When it was Kathy Griffin, when it was Eminem. I mean, it was heated rhetoric, but no one expected Kathy Griffin to sneak into the White House and decapitate Trump, right? Like she's hideous. No one would let her in.
Yeah.
And so like no one thought that was going to happen. Eminem's just a weirdo, closeted gay. So they weren't like, if he was in there with Trump, he'd be hitting on him anyway. No one thought they were actually serious about killing someone. They missed the pulse check. Tenacious D misses the pulse check because the reality of an assassination came home. And then he's like, no, it's still a diss track. And everybody's like, actually, dude, this isn't funny. Like, because if Trump hadn't turned his head, he's dead. And we're at war. I mean, we're on the brink. We've been talking about this, not you and I, but everybody has been talking about how tense the United States has been. And it's been this way, as far back as Obama's presidency really solidified how tense everything was for me, and watching it just kind of steadily decline from 2008 to now 2024. And just wait, it's like, what is the flashpoint? If Trump had died, it very likely we're at some kind of war. Violence breaks out. It's scary. And these guys are so dense. They're like, no, if Trump would have died, life would have just gone on like normal. It's like, no. That's not how it goes. And most people have the good sense to go, it's one thing to say, oh, the president should be shot or killed because he's a piece of garbage. It's another thing when someone tries to shoot the president, they go, I didn't mean that. I was hyperbolizing that he shouldn't be running for president. Right. And this guy's like, no, it's like, you missed the bus, buddy. And it was short. It wasn't hard to miss.
Exactly. I mean, it's just this disconnect. It's like being here at the convention in Milwaukee. It reminded me of 2016 being at the convention in Cleveland, where the media class has just open contempt for these ordinary people that have become the delegates, right? They're people that love to wear their red, white, and blue shirts. Like, they don't even think of what they're doing as uber patriotic. It's just who they are. They got their Abraham Lincoln hats on. You know, they love old America because it's old America. You know, they like all the things that are so-called cleats, you know, things that Elvis would have loved, you know. Right. They love the golden Trump plate, you know, all that kind of thing. And the elite snobs and the media don't understand it, don't accept it, don't connect to it, don't relate to it, are disconnected. And what it was another reminder of how disconnected this certain subgroup is. They don't realize the country has changed in 8 years in ways that they don't understand, that they don't conceive, that they can't connect to. They don't understand how the political zeitgeist has changed. And they're so out of it that they didn't see. I mean, I think the deep state apparatus didn't see this coming. Because, I mean, when they took out Kennedy in 1963, assassinated Martin Luther King in 1968, Malcolm X, and Robert Kennedy, you know, all within a 5-year period, they take out prominent would-be presidents, civil rights leaders, or public leaders, and then do the stage of the coup against Nixon with Watergate. And then all of a sudden there was a massive blowback. Like, they learned the hard way. Then came the Church Committee, then came the Intelligence Committee, then came the Committee on Assassinations, then came the committee that detailed MK Ultra. All that only happened because the public was like, something's wrong with all these assassinations and coups.
Yeah, and this doesn't normally happen. Like, people, I guess, normal working class aged people and their parents don't remember this.
Yeah,
and that's when the country finally gets their wake up call, I think. Because I'm 42, when people my age don't remember people getting assassinated politically, and our parents barely, like my parents were really young when JFK was killed. And so like they're at the cusp of the last major political assassinations being completely forgotten by the main voting generations. And like, when we don't remember that, seeing Trump get shot at and actually tagged and so close to dying is jarring. And it is that shake waking you up from the fucking coma. And you're like, oh, wait, I don't remember this at all. This is not normal. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about in the 60s. People are like, this keeps happening too. And this has never been how this stuff works. Something's wrong.
They became skeptical of the system. Something's institutionally at fault. Something sick in American power. And I think these elites thought they were sufficiently distant from it that they could do it all over again. And they didn't understand the dynamic. They don't. I mean, it's like all the people that thought, well, Biden could be replaced. And it's like, by who? mean, the problem with the Democratic Party as a party is unpopular. Its policies are unpopular.
Mhm.
We have power. We went from peace abroad and prosperity at home to poverty at home and war abroad. Those are things that no Democrat can change. Obama's policies were never popular. Obama himself, there was this great desire for the first black president to be successful. And it was not a deep belief in Obama's neoliberal agenda. And the same is true of Biden. And his replacements are all more unpopular. Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Hillary Clinton, Pete Buttigieg. None of these people are people that people here in Wisconsin can't wait to see as the future president. And they really thought, well, we can just kill Trump and just solve it all. I mean, and I saw Mitch McConnell here. I was like, okay, he was here expecting to replace Trump.
Could you imagine the turtle champion as president? Oh God, it'd be a nightmare.
Complete. Well, you have Schumer running around telling everybody he could take care of everything. Let him be the president. So, I mean, but these are people that they don't understand. The world doesn't like him. America doesn't like him. America doesn't want him. And it's like the Tories who helped destroy their party overnight. A party that was built over a century may not exist in 5 years because of their ineptitude and incompetency. And credit to Trump, his immediate reaction was, I need to double down on the populist anti-establishment message.
Yep.
So how do I do that? I'm going to talk to Robert Kennedy and let everybody know maybe I'll put him in charge of vaccine injury issues in the next administration, and I'll let Kennedy be the one to leak it. I'll have JD Vance come on as my vice president. Those two choices by themselves, monumental. And
we'll see if he continues with like Lincoln's team of rascals or whatever, right?
Yeah, I think he's going to take, he also has Vivek go out and tell everybody he's going to put a libertarian in the cabinet. It means he's going to go to the wall, because by trying to kill him, they revealed themselves to them that they're people that cannot be negotiated with. They're people that have to be crushed, as Huey Long learned the lesson of. And I think Trump, that was it was an incredibly dumb move on their part. It's like, even if they achieve their objective, they got a civil war. If they don't achieve their objective, they've got Trump turned on them full scale. And I think it's a great for freedom, liberty, populist causes, independent causes. You care about any of those things? What happened with the way Trump handled it was not only iconic in the history of American politics, but maybe the greatest turn of the head in the history of America.
Yeah, and it's of course is fortunate, because one of the the immediate speculation is like, this benefits Trump so heavily. Do you consider the possibility of an inside job? But when you look at the analysis of how close he came to actually dying, you go, there's no way that at that moment he could turn the head at this exact point that the trigger pull is going to make this an accident. And only idiots who've never tried to fire a rifle, like a precision rifle at any sort of distance, are going to think, oh yeah, well, he's got he's a sniper. He can take, it's like, no, you're not shooting an earlobe, right? This isn't a Mark Wahlberg movie.
Not, that great video they were showing today where it was supposed to go right through his head. And it was a kill shot. I mean, I also think, I don't know what you think, my instinct right away was this was an inside job by people at the Secret Service were implicated. I don't think the counter sniper on the roof was part of the inside job. I think part of his confusion was, I think he looks through that thing and he doesn't see that guy with the gun. And then he hears the shots and he's like, okay, I just got to take this guy out. But I think he was the patsy. I think somebody inside that building took the shots. And I think they had planned on a bunch of bombs going off. Trump getting killed. They could take out the patsy, have a bunch of bombs go off. And now it's become clear they planned on blaming Iran. They wanted us to get into another war in another place, in another location, which is just insanity times insanity, because they tried to snooker Iran into the Israeli conflict. Iran didn't take the bait. And now they were going to say, and they figured they could get Trump rolled behind it. It would serve it's just like the Kennedy assassination, where they plan on blaming the Soviet Union and Cuba. And all the military generals that thought, hey, we got these wonderful nuclear weapons, we can't let them go to waste. Now is the time when we have a nuclear weapons edge to take out China, take out the Soviet Union. And LBJ decided, I'm going to use that as the pretext to keep people from investigating my own culpability and complicity in the Kennedy assassination by saying, don't dig in, you'll find out Soviet Union is responsible, and then we'll have World War III. I think they thought they could pull it off again. They'd blame Iran. They rallied the Republican convention to say, stand up to Iran, put Nikki Haley or somebody like that in as the new nominee. The deep state figured they'd win either way. Either they get Joe Biden or Nikki Haley. It doesn't matter. They win. And Joe Biden has an excuse to do his October surprise in July and go to war with Iran, rally around the flag. And he could even say he was doing it for Trump. And it all went sideways because Trump wanted to look at the fancy chart with the visuals that showed all the illegal immigrants coming in.
I really like this. The chart's really good. Great chart. Beautiful. Lots of different colors. No, and I think I've been thinking about just the whole situation. I think the biggest summary on how badly this went for the Democrats is that Joe Biden is still the nominee. I mean, they were talking serious talks. I thought it was kind of some gaslighting at first, but there was movement going on in the upper levels of the Democrat Party to seriously think they could 11th hour replace Joe Biden with some other candidate. That person would be able to edge Trump out to victory by just not being as clumsy as Joe Biden, but riding on sort of the good karma that they've built up. I disagree, but that's the thought. And then this happens and they're like, we have to bet on the incumbent. We have to bet on the power of the eye and not independence, incumbency. Because right now, if we switch at the 11th hour now, they don't have a chance. Right. Joe Biden, they might be able to ride out the next couple months and rebuild some semblance of a fight. And of course, the news media is going to pull. They're going to be a tractor pull, like pulling those sleds uphill, just trying, because their ratings are benefited heavily by just an even race. Like that's all they really want. They want an even race that's not predictable because they want you to watch all the way through election coverage. It's where they get a shitload of money, shitload of attention, and these people become irrelevant again right after. So they want an even race. That's what they're going to be doing the heavy lifting. And they all guaranteed thought there's no way anyone other than Biden we can't make this work. We can work miracles, but not that big. And I think that's the biggest indicator of just how good this is for Trump.
No, I mean, and it was interesting. Like Tucker's explanation tonight was that, because people asked him, why do you believe it's too big to rig? And because he said it earlier, he said, here's why. He goes, I think the problem they now face is that the country won't believe in any election results that show anyone other than Trump winning. And I agree with you. The only person they could even try to sell that with is Biden. They have no chance of selling a stolen election with anybody else. And now they got a huge hurdle trying to even sell it with Biden. I mean, I've been saying for years now that the difference between the political establishment, the deep state, national security establishment, whatever language one wants to use, is the difference between them now and, say, generations ago was Henry Kissinger's moral compass was always broken, but his intellectual competency was never in doubt. We have people that are both morally corrupt and incorrigibly incompetent, that they're like the people that led the British and French and German and Austro-Hungarian and Russian and Ottoman Empire into a global war in World War I that destroyed every single one of those empires. Some of them had been 6 centuries in the making,
right?
Less than a decade. And it's like those people didn't do it deliberately. They did it because they're stupid. I always tell people, I don't mind a criminal. I don't mind a stupid person, but you combine the two of them and you've got trouble. And we've got that all over the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, and our political establishment. And it is fun. It's walking around, seeing all the ordinary people in such a cheery mood and seeing all the lobbyist types. I ran into one of these scumbags that helped take out James O'Keefe.
Okay, I'm sorry. You just had the greatest 90s rendition of the word scumbags, which is one of my favorite movies. Ran into one of these scumbags. I was like, yes. Oh God, sorry. Go on.
I didn't even know he was. Like, he comes up to me and he goes, hey, I'm a member of the board. And I'm thinking he's a member, Viva Barnes Law, because I always call that a board. Because it's great community, great people. And I'd run into a bunch of them here. And then it turns out he's the board of Project Veritas. And he's like, you libeled me. You and Viva libel. I'm going to file ethics complaint against you and Viva. I don't know why people think this is a threat. There's a certain member of a certain other board that I briefly represented that was also recently threatening me, saying he's going to file ethics complaints against me. So I publicly reminded him that that is not a method of intimidation. And if you're dumb enough to think that if you hire a lawyer for a brief period of time, that you have bought their you have a permanent injunction against their free speech. Newsflash to you, Mr. Moon, that doesn't know how that works. So it's amazing. So many people get these. They get the. I mean, heck, I even refer him to a good civil rights lawyer that's still working for him for cheap. But you get these people. So this guy comes up to me and he thinks he's going to intimidate me into changing my story. He's like, "Oh, you libeled me." Da, 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 da. He said things that I'm pretty sure I didn't actually say about him, but now I'm willing to say about him because he's a scumbag. But he was still defending himself about taking out James O'Keefe, and he's part of this sort of lobbyist underworld swarmy groups that are here that are mostly depressed and angry and enraged. He's enraged because his effort to hijack the funds of Project Veritas for he and his corrupt pals in D.C. completely backfired and failed. But I was sitting there talking to him, and I'm like, how can you still be proud of yourself? You helped destroy Project Veritas based on complaints. He's like, well, you don't understand. He violated this rule, violated this rule. It was like, what you're talking about is like, I don't even believe what you're saying is true. But even if it were true, you're describing something that happens every single day in Washington, D.C. at 10 times the level. And you're complaining about whether or not he met a donor at this particular time. You got to be kidding me. There's a guy who risked his life for the work he does. And you're complaining about that. You're complaining about whether the donor met him at the right time on the boat. And finally, I was so enraged at talking. It was like it all distilled in a second. And I was like, you're just bottom barrel scum. And I ended up screaming at him, bottom barrel scum, right in the middle of the entire crowd. I ended up getting filmed. Other people sent it to James O'Keefe. Other people sent it to other people. And it was not intended by me. But it was like, these are the people that are making America difficult, making American political life incapable of representing the ordinary person's interests for the last 60 plus years.
Right.
Problem. But what's happy to see here is they're all miserable. They're miserable in the media rooms. They're miserable in the lobbyists and the corporate suites on the second floor. Half of them are abandoning their corporate suites because they're shocked at what they're witnessing. Many of them thought they were coming to replace Trump based on what happened. They thought was going to happen on Saturday that didn't. They realized they've lost control of the party. They've lost control of the people. They've lost control of the country. And thank God they have. It's like watching my great-great-great-granddad was Colonel Prescott, who was at Bunker Hill, who said, don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. And I always wondered, what would it be like to be in the middle of that moment, right? You have these oncoming guns that are going to take your life, take your friend's life, take your family life, take your colleague's life. And you're at a moment of a central revolution to change the world, from a world run by churches and kings to a world run by principles of natural law and ordinary, everyday Americans, ordinary people's rights. And his reaction was, just don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. And
don't miss. Exactly. Don't miss. We're low on musket rounds.
Exactly. And that simple message, even though they didn't win that battle of Bunker Hill, they won the war of court of public opinion by that willingness to resist under most extraordinary circumstances. And the next thing I've ever seen that looked like that was what Trump did when he stood up and did his fist and said, fight, fight, fight. No fear. Don't give in. Don't quit. Don't surrender. I was like, wow, this is the second American Revolution, and we're living it in live time.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's I've been saying for a while, it feels like a cold civil war. There's not really guns blazing. We get flashes of violence with the Summer of Love and like some low-level political assassinations. Oh, that's a Trump guy gets shot in the head in Seattle and stuff. And that's jarring. But to see that the American cold revolution, and people talk about wanting like revolution or wanting civil wars. Like you really don't. Like you don't want the hot war here at home. It destroys everything, and all of that has to be rebuilt. And you don't know who's going to do the rebuilding. I know a couple of people who claim they're accelerationists. I'm like, you're kind of a scarily shallow thinker who thinks that you win once that accelerationism happens. And that's not a guaranteed outcome. That's a roll of the dice. And the scary thing is being rebuilt into tyranny in the wake of the fear that people feel when their neighbors are shooting their kids and shit like that. But yeah, I mean, the sort of Cold War American Revolution, the second revolution is we are constantly, and I think the Supreme Court has been really indicative of it, and the reaction to the Supreme Court. We're redefining American law, or finally defining American law in ways that hasn't happened really since the passage of the 14th Amendment. And to see that level of change come in the Second Amendment, come in with presidential power because of Trump again, come in with removing this deference to the administrative state, which is an unenumerated branch of government that severed itself from the executive. It's like, no, you're under the president, but the administrative state believes that they run the presidency through their, through their sort of rulemaking process. And the Supreme Court finally has come in and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. You're actually subject to Congress and the other guy. You're subject to the executive and to Congress. Back the fuck down. But all of these institutions that have been built by what I like to call kind of the economy of convenience, where before we had, again, the democratization of information, everything was filtered through outlets like major media channels. First, it was newspapers aggregating into big papers like New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, and all these other little papers going away and being bought out. Then you have the major news networks and the news wires, Reuters, you have AP, you have NBC, all of these things being the sole arbiters of getting access to global information distribution. All of that's being wiped away now. And when that was all popular, we saw the same thing in politics. I mean, that's what happened with the administrative state. It was just damn convenient for them to run everything. And no one got to talk about it because you had to go through the gatekeepers. There aren't gatekeepers anymore. I mean, well, YouTube can be a gatekeeper, but Rumble's there, Kick's there, Twitch is there. There are ways to get the message out. And finally, people are going, why are we letting these unelected weirdos run our lives so thoroughly that they can make a definition change and you're now a felon? And people were like, wait, they can do that? It's like, yeah. If you eat a lobster at the wrong season at the wrong restaurant, you're a felon because it's a felony somewhere else across the world and you didn't know. But they can do that. They can interpret that. Well, they could up until Chevron got trashed. But we're seeing this redefining of American law. And to me, it's fascinating. And it's much better than bullets. But man, they hate the Supreme Court. Their reactions to Clarence Thomas and the pressure that they're putting on him and Alito are just indicative of how scared they are of these robed old men. Just like they do not want them to be able to render another opinion.
Well, it's been fascinating watching on a micro scale in the Amos Miller case, the Amish farmer, that you have these regulatory agencies that come in and assert they have the right to redefine all kinds of words. They can come into a farmer, take away all his food, detain it, order it to be destroyed so that he cannot even feed his own family, cannot even feed his own animals, food he himself farmed. And they expected the judges to just rubber stamp this, even though it's without legal precedent in the state. And it was interesting watching the judge over time convert in his change of mindset as he decided to reinforce the law and rule against them repeatedly, though we're still in front of them because they keep coming back begging and demanding that their politics, that their policies that get all deferred to. And there's other cases in Pennsylvania. Well, I don't think it was a surprise the assassination attempt took place in Pennsylvania. My experience in Pennsylvania is there's too much corruption throughout the entire state at the highest rank of positions of power and influence. But they're so accustomed to abusing that power that, I always remind people, the United States, the federal government, the state government, has a higher share of our GDP than in communist Venezuela. It's like Venezuela doesn't control their economy as much as our federal and state government does. That's how out of whack and out of control it is.
It's insane.
And completely insane. And what the Supreme Court is finally doing, and especially if you add to that, their rulings about jury trials, about the SEC no longer gets to do these fake, bogus administrative trials. These new rulings about, hey, you don't get to be the adjudicative branch. You don't get to be the legislative branch. And in fact, you got to be careful when you're even the executive branch. I mean, that's really the impact of Judge Cannon dismissing that indictment, saying unless you're properly constitutionally appointed, you have no power to assert criminal authority in the United States. I mean, that has all kinds of ramifications in a range of other cases. So it's finally the judiciary waking up to the American public demand that we actually be the rule of law in this country. And the other amazing thing is in such a short time period, people who, I've been arguing to mostly lefties for 25 years about how our legal system is corrupt, how the government is unreliable and untrustworthy as an ally in any context, civil or criminal. I've defended victims of abuse in a wide range of cases the worst agency in the world is the Child Protective Services Agency.
No, they're great.
Yeah, you say everything is politically correct. I hate them. I despise them. And I say that as a defender of victims all across the country. I've done more pro bono cases for victims of abuse than almost any lawyer in America. I've done it for a quarter century. And the people that work for Children's Protective Services are, at least in my professional experience, utter scumbags who don't care about civil liberties, don't care about children, don't care about the law. And the same in the criminal justice system. I've been trying to educate people for a long time that we cannot trust too many of our police officers are not honest. There are those that are. I know many of them, but there are plenty that aren't. And those are the ones that get rewarded. The honest cop gets punished. The honest cop gets demoted. The dishonorable cop gets promoted. The Shield is a more accurate reflection of cops in power than Law and Order. And prosecutors are some of the most corrupt rogue people on the planet. And and our judges are rubber stamps for corruption too much of the time. But because of what they've witnessed with Trump, they gave a crash course masterclass to ordinary middle American conservatives at how corrupt our civil justice system had become, how corrupt our criminal justice system had become at both the state and federal level. And in the process, they're revolutionizing the American mindset and creating the possibility for the American Revolution to read in the words it was written in. And that is the best hope I've seen in my entire legal career.
Well, I don't think, thank God, honestly, thank God, the average person does not realize just what the government can do to you.
Yeah.
Like it runs afoul of all the principles of the founding of our country and the structure of our legal system. No one under either an administrative ruling or an administrative hearing or a family law enforcement case like CPS, no one feels innocent until proven guilty. In fact, they don't have to prove anything ever. What CPS has to do, as you know, is make recommendations. Those recommendations don't have to be supported by fact. They're literally supported by feeling in almost every case. Now, sometimes they'll have some factual piece that they latch onto, and they try and build a narrative around that. But in criminal cases, what they would have to do is actually prove out the narrative beyond a reasonable doubt. In family law, because there's so much deference to the well-being of the child, and because judges are really scared that if they run against family services recommendation, there's going to be a dead kid. And that's going to come up at the judge's next election. Or even, like, not to make it so crass, that's going to come up on the judge's conscience when they eat dinner that night. When that CPS attorney comes in the next day and says, "Judge, we need to dismiss this case because the kid went back home and now they're deceased." That's every judge's nightmare in a CPS case. The problem is that has made them so afraid to go against those rulings, and they don't view the rights of the parents and they don't view the timelines as reality. Because for a judge, they'll go, well, it's just another month. And for the parents and the kids, they're like, another month is an eternity for them. And so people don't realize like how little is required for them to intervene in your life and to intervene so deeply. And when you're in a situation like mine, where you have these parallel cases, you cannot adequately address CPS because you have a criminal matter, and those timelines are different. And that means that you have to shut your mouth on certain things, whereas other people would be able to maybe talk to CPS about it. And CPS doesn't care. In fact, they might be relying on that, but they want the story. They want you, because again, family services is about narrative, and it's about story, and it's about fear. Whereas criminal justice is more about fact, because you have legal arguments that have to be supported. And people don't understand that. They don't realize just what it is when government violates your rights, and how easy it is for them to do it, and how hard it is to fight back against it, because you're constrained by the system while they violate your rights. And then you have to prove it. But sometimes proving your rights were violated involves you doing something that you can't do, like testify in your own case. The risk of calling out a bad actor in the government might mean, oh, but you're going to have to answer all of these other questions that are against your interest. or you'll have to take the fifth. If you take the fifth in a CPS case, as you know, they get to draw a negative inference. Whereas in the criminal case, they can't draw any inference from it. But in a CPS case, they can. So you open yourselves up to this exposure where CPS has you by the short and curlies, and they say, hey, you have to answer these questions for us to be satisfied. You say, I can't even talk at all. And they are free to lie. And if you don't have another person who can testify to the lie, you just have to live with it. And that's the system you're in. And so they're able to bully people. And I think you've been pointing this out with the Amish family, like what they can do if they don't like you. And people think like conspiracies require this grandiose plan of like the government at the federal level, some like deep state agent is out to get some local farmer. No, if someone, a cop, a CPS worker, anybody just doesn't like you enough to be sloppy on their job, that's when your rights are gone. And you have to pay thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get them back. And in the meanwhile, everybody's able to malign you. People don't run into this because most people don't have to deal with that. Thank God. That's the difference between a first world and a third world country. But when you're in it and you're sitting there going, I know I have these rights and I don't even get to fight for them because of the way the system is set up. Other people are like, well, why don't you just do this? Like, no, you can't. Like, there's not a venue for you to do that.
Well, I used to describe to people, I said the genius of the American system is that it only exposes itself to a very small percentage of people. So that 95% of the people only believe in the Law and Order illusionary version they see on TV. Yep. And the CSI version of criminal labs. I represented one of the guys who was the first whistleblowers against the 1970s Michigan crime lab. He later became another whistleblower in Tennessee against another fake agency. And the number of people who believe that if they say science, magically it means everything is fine. It's like, I've dealt with these people. They lie all the friggin' time. It's all they do is lie. It's how they keep their job. It's how they get their job. It's how they make their money. But the genius of the system was making sure 90% of the country had no idea how it operated and believing in the delusional version they saw presented in popular media. That was their huge mistake with Trump. All of a sudden, they're going to take something that 60% of the country is tuning into, that most are supporters and fans of Trump amongst that 60%. And they're going to say, let us show you what the civil justice system really looks like. Let us show you what the state criminal justice system really looks like. Let's show you what the federal criminal justice system really looks like. And give them this masterclass crash course that they would realize, hold on, there's systemic flaws here. How did this ever become an indictment? How is there a civil case by a woman who's certifiable claiming sexual assault 30 years later? How is there a case saying that he should be bankrupted with $500 million in fines when the so-called victim testifies in his favor and the bank says we can't wait to do business with him again? Yep. They're like, hold on a second. This doesn't make any sense. And then they start to step back and ask themselves about the other case that they heard about in their local community. What if that allegation was false? What if that accusation was untrue? What if that was another lie by some politically mad politician? How did all the prosecutors, all the judges, all the law enforcement officers all end up complicit in these insane cases against the former president of the United States and future president of the United States? And it's seen what I've seen firsthand for a quarter century, which is the people in positions of power not put there because they're honest and honorable. They're put there because they keep their mouth shut when they see something bad, or they're people who are openly corrupt and psychotic. Most of the people I dealt with in Children's Protective Services were abusers themselves. It was clear they would side with abusers over and over again. They would never side with the kid who wanted to actually be with their family. No, they wouldn't side with the people who were actually the victims of abuse or abusers. It was mindset. It was insane. But then I began to understand the psychology, the dynamic in many states across the country. If you want to make money as a child protective services officer, you have to keep the case going longer. If you don't, you're not going to get paid and feed your own family. And then, the same problem is the same problem I see with bail. If you're a judge, federal judge, state court judge, making a bail decision, you know that the one person, even though the legal standard is, it has to be, at least by preponderance of the evidence, sometimes clear and convincing, depending on what the state is and what the jurisdiction is. But that you are supposed to not lock people up based on accusation, only lock people up based on conviction by a jury. And yet that frequently doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because they're terrified. the one person they mistakenly grant bail to goes out and does something horrible, and they get blamed for it. So I, as a lawyer,
and they do.
Yeah,
those people do. Like there are. I've talked about this a little bit, where most murderers don't murder again, like because their issue with the person they murder is resolved. It's usually something very like specific. It's usually someone they know. There's some either some build. I'm not going to say it's all heat of passion, the moment, or whatever, but there's some building thing. But once it's gone, like, well, they're not going to kill anybody again. But there are also just the sociopathic murderers who are out there who treat human life as garbage because maybe the community that they grew up in treated human life as garbage. That's what they saw. You see this in Southside Chicago. You see this in New Orleans. You see this in the major metro areas where life is literally expendable, and people come out. So that, yeah, they'll oh gosh, it was one of my favorite moments in The Wire when Bunk Moreland he's talking to all the criminals, and he's like, gave him get out of jail free cards. And one guy's like, I got some bodies. And Bunk's like, how many? And he goes, and Bunk's like, oh. But it's like, this guy has killed 4 people because he doesn't see life as anything important, because his life wasn't. And so they do get that person who skips bail, or they grant them bail. Bail's paid for by, maybe a drug dealer, a gang member, whoever. And that person goes out and just ices a family of witnesses. And that's that. And that judge has to live with that decision. Most people aren't like that, but it is the one that makes the news. And it's the one that ruins the lives of so many.
Exactly. And it ends up leading to the deprivation of liberty for 100 other people. Because like, maybe you're totally innocent. Maybe you're no risk to the community, but in the 1 in 100 chance, even though the evidentiary standard is 51%, it just has to be 1% for you to be denied bail. And it's how the system quits functioning and breaks down. And what we've seen it is at multiple levels of governance in society. And Trump has just been a living example of exemplifying it and demonstrating almost accidentally. It was like the way Dennis Miller described his support for Ross Perot in 1992. He said, this guy's just going to go in and everything's going to get exposed by accident. He's just, just the reaction to his independence is going to be so over the top. We're going to figure out corruption we didn't even knew existed before. And that's what Trump has exposed over the last 8 years. And most likely will continue to expose going forward. But it's been, when I used to talk about deep state, people thought, okay, whatever. Barnes has been hanging out with his lefty pals and has a bunch of conspiracy crazy theories. Now everybody knows exactly what I mean. It's like a shortcut to explaining to something. I don't have to explain, well, it's the dual state, which is the administrative state within government, explained by the Reporter and the Economist back in 1885. And this was developed by the society, the philosophers and political scientists that left Germany and Italy after the fascism, after World War II, and developed it. And then Peter Dale Scott described in 1968 to explain what happens when the CIA and the FBI and the national security and military industrial complex are the dual state, well, they're a deep state. Don't have to explain that anymore. Say deep state, those are the corrupt gray men that Putin describes as running America, no matter who the president is. And so it's Trump has been sometimes an accidental, like Peter Sellers, the accidental president, an accidental description. But now he's, I think, intending to make change in ways he didn't even intend to do before, because they went too far and they finally crossed their own Rubicon. And in the process, maybe we can rediscover and recover America, but we've got to do it all the way down. There's got to be institutional reform and remedy. There's got to be reinstatement of core civil rights and liberties against all these corrosively corrupt government agencies at every level of governance and government.
It's an amazing thing because, again, the words deep state, the words conspiracy evoke the Hollywood version of this, where someone becomes so critically important that there's an entire federal agency hell bent on destroying that person. It's like, again, just going back to your Amish farmer. No one's like, you know what? Fuck this guy. Like at this high level, they're not doing, they just created a rule. This guy messed with the rule, and that bothers them. Like that really, really annoys them because they made a rule, damn it. And this guy is like, thinks he doesn't have to follow the rule because what? Because he walks around with a horse and a buggy instead of a Prius? Like, who does this guy think he is? And that's it. And it's, again, they don't have to come after you. All they have to do is do their job sloppily in one spot, and then you have to fight for it back. The problem is most people can't afford the fight. And that's why when you talk to oh my gosh, when you talk to agencies like CPS, they don't deal with wealthy families very often. When they do, it's like this big high profile case. It's news around the office. No one fights back against CPS. They all capitulate. They all just go along with it because they don't have any money. They get appointed counsel. That counsel gets paid by the government who's trying to keep these kids away or use these kids for some reason. They're not going to fight. Like you said, they want the case to drag out. They want it to go longer and longer and longer because it justifies their job, justifies their pay. They have their moral authority, their moral good intentions. They're saving kids from dangerous situations, and they believe this. And they don't. The hardest part to get your head around with these agents is they literally believe they're doing good. And the scary part is they get these very narrow pictures of the people they're dealing with. They don't know this person. They haven't met them for 20 years or 30 years or whatever. They just get a blurb, a paragraph about them, and they go, I have to make a decision to save this kid, to save this elderly person, to whoever. If I don't, they're in danger. And so they're not, people think they have to be malicious or nefarious. They're worried about the Amish farmer. They're like, this guy's going to have more salmonella coming out of his farm than Chipotle. And that's going to be terrible. People are going to die. Some kids are going to drink this raw milk from their crazy parents or whatever. And they're going to, like, they obviously don't know. They've been indoctrinated into how the state views, we'll say reality, but it's lensed through pasteurization and homogenization of milk and cream. Like that's how the state views it. This is the way we drink milk. And it's like, no, you can actually just leave a big giant vat of it warm outside if you've got the cream on top, which forms a protective layer, and raw milk is very stable for quite a bit longer. The state doesn't know that. They don't care. They don't believe it. They just think, well, that's going to make somebody sick, and I can't let people get sick. It's my job to stop that. And so you run up against this where people are like, these people, why do you think they hate you? Why do you think they do this? Like, they don't have to hate you. They think they're doing good, and they don't know any better about you until you somehow get the chance to tell them. But the system is engineered so you don't get to, because if you get to tell them, they have to, one, they think you're lying, and two, you have to do it in specific ways. Otherwise, they'll just ramrod you through the ringer.
Well, I mean, I was explaining to the Amish a couple of years ago when all this started with Amos Miller. And so I was meeting with a bunch of Amish. They were coming together in these big groups, and they had convinced themselves that it was just Amos making mistakes, and that was the only reason why he was being targeted. And I was saying, no, this is going to be systemic. And I started to explain why I believed it would be systemic. And I said, part one is, I was like, you didn't intend on it, but you are a control group alternative. That if we wanted to look around and say, what would life be like if we were not on the Bill Gates dystopian control grid? You know, big tech, big pharma, big food, big media. It's like there's only one group in the entire country that's literally nowhere on that control grid, and it's the Amish. And some of you, like Amos Miller, are giving that Amish exit ramp to ordinary Americans, saying, hey, you can enjoy the benefit of our food. You can enjoy the benefit of our food without reliance and dependence on big pharma or these other things. Yeah. And I said, for certain people, if you're Bill Gates, this is a problem. You don't want people doing these studies showing the Amish have lower rates of autism, lower rates of chronic disease, lower rates of mental health illness, lower rates of anxiety or depression, lower rates of substance abuse, lower rates of psychological harm, living healthier and happier and longer lives by almost every objective metric. That's a problem if you want them eating fake meat rather than real meat. If you wanted them eating everything pasteurized and homogenized and chemicalized, you know, you want the industrialized, commercialized, monopolized food supply. It's a problem. And I said, one of the reasons why I knew you Amish were going to be targets is what happens is these people with power and influence, they start it by putting something out in Hollywood, something through the media industry, that so that the social worker, so that the state worker in Pennsylvania no longer thinks of you through common popular culture of a movie like Witness and says, you know, Amish are wonderful, sweethearted, good-natured people who like to sing old German hymns and take care of their children and avoid violence, etc. But instead is a dangerous cultish group that has this like alternative criminal subcomponent that they're
stranglehold on their children and their upbringing.
Exactly, they're secretive, and they meet in secret. They only work together and they only live together. You play on every dangerous stereotype. And I was like, this started happening 5 years ago on a show called Banshee on Showtime. That it started portraying this Amish mafia. It was like we went from Witness, a film that portrayed you very sympathetically, to shows portraying you very antagonistically. And I was like, that's a sign that somebody with some political power, somebody with juice, somebody like Bill Gates or George Soros, helps, fund it. Just get it made as a good show. The people putting it on don't have to be complicit. You don't have to have everybody complicit. You just have to put the idea out there, plant in the back of people's mind without them even thinking about it. The way we've done, say, Russians, for example. For 15 years, Hollywood's been telling everybody Russians scary, Russians dangerous, Russians mob, Russians violence, Russians this. They were the bad guy in every film and every TV show. Why? Because it puts an idea in the back of your brain. And so it preconditions you to accept a narrative down the road. So You're a little state worker in Pennsylvania. You might not be part of any conspiracy against anybody, but you're like, oh, those Amish, I think there is something up with them. I think there's something. They don't even realize what they're connecting it to. And I was explaining to them, I was like, you'll know whether I'm right if over the next 2 years, suddenly you're getting harassed in ways you never were before. And today I have over a half dozen Amish clients. Yeah. And they're getting harassed at every single level. And it's for people who don't even realize the operation they're a part of. The local prosecutor, the local government worker, the local cop, the local animal rights person who's been preconditioned to think the Amish are the great danger. The Amish are the great threat to food safety, animal safety, whatever it is. And so that they're all of a sudden tired that, like I get run into people and say, oh, the Amish don't pay any taxes. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. They don't have to pay Social Security taxes because they opt out of Social Security, but they pay income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, every other tax known to man. But it's little things like that. Like, I run into animal rights protesters who think the Amish secretly kill their animals. It's like they're some of the most generous towards animals of any farmers in the world. But it's all this little cultural conditioning and to get people to accept that the government makes the accusation. Surely it must be true. That mindset. I remember debating with this woman because I represented Wesley Snipes in a case in which the first case I represented Snipes in wasn't a criminal tax case. It was a case in which he was accused of being somebody's parent out of wedlock. And the accusation was insane. But what happened is the family court system had become so good at coercive power. The New York family court system had the power to enter a mandatory arrest warrant for a forcible DNA extraction into the Interpol system. That's how insane it had become. So what happens is this corrupt political official in Indiana. And are they like corrupt? No, they just think, oh, I can accuse Wesley Snipes because I got a crazy client seeking family benefits, and I can become famous. I can, get the Wesley Snipes case. But Indiana, we got these due process rules, so I can't use Indiana. So I'm going to file it in New York because New York doesn't have any due process rules, and they get to enter their DNA warrants with these hearing examiners that couldn't get real legal jobs. And he gets into an Interpol warrant where I'm on the phone with airports all across the world saying, you better not arrest Wesley Snipes for a forcible DNA extraction for a crazy case. I have to independently investigate it. It turns out the woman believed that Prince had stolen the lyrics from her for Purple Rain, that Oprah had stolen all of her image and marketing ideas, and that Wesley Snipes wasn't Wesley Snipes, but he was really Jesus Estradas, her Cuban cousin, where they had 8 kids together and had been secretly married in a CIA-sponsored wedding in Mexico.
I can see it. Actually, that one I believe.
Yeah, exactly.
The other ones, I'm not with her on the Oprah thing or the Prince thing, but I'm with her on Wesley Snipes being Jesus.
Well, it turns out she had named 2 parents, but this was after Bill Clinton's welfare reform laws. And Bill Clinton's welfare reform laws required you to name the father in order to get welfare benefits. The problem is you never wanted to name the real father because the real father was helping out a little bit under the table. So her real father happened to be her pimp, by the way. Yeah. She named him, but she named somebody else, knowing the government would chase that person, saying Jesus Estradas, a.k.a. Wesley Trent Snipes. The irony was you're supposed to identify 16 traits of the person that you could only know about them, like their body, etc. She couldn't identify 15 of the 16. The 16th was tattoos, and she didn't know if the blade tattoos were real or not. So she said maybe. So It's like they knew it was a lie. but their egos and ambition and self-justification led them to pursue a completely bogus case. And the excuse I got from people when we challenged it was, well, if he has nothing to hide, why isn't he afraid of a DNA test? Real simple. Wesley Snipes was not giving the government any part of his body for any reason, for any purpose, at any time. But I get
why not just comply?
Yeah, exactly. That's what they say. And I was talking to this, and it was one of these young women at one of these clubs, and I was like, "Yeah, I think you're right. I think we need to put a camera in your bedroom and your bathroom just to make sure you're not up to anything sneaky in there. And because we won't abuse that power, of course. We'll only do it to make sure you're not doing any." And then she was like, "Wow, hold on, that's excessive." It's like, well, when is it excessive and when is it not? I think it's excessive whenever the government's not entitled to it and they're trying to get it from you.
Yeah, I've got some of that going on in my own thing, and it's wild because people are like, well, why don't you just do this? It's like, because they don't get that. Like they don't have a right to it, and it will never help you. It would never help Wesley Snipes to go turn over some piece of thing to the government. They would. It's like Bronco always talks about with the caliber of the bullet, or the self-defense weapon that's used. It's like if it's a high caliber bullet, it's like, well, what they're trying to do is kill him extra hard. And if it's they're trying to be secretive about it. It's like, that's not how guns work. But you can never make the right decision. Government wants your information at any and all opportunities. It's why when you get arrested, even if you're wrongfully arrested, now someone's going to claim that I'm talking about me. I'm not here saying anything of the sort. I'm talking about when I went to jail. Actually, this is a fun story. There was a guy who was in there, and the government, the jail workers are sitting there. He starts yelling. He's like, "Hey, yo, when am I getting out? I got stuff to do." And the jail worker's like, "You didn't tell us your name." He's like, "That's because you had the wrong guy. You didn't have a right to my name. You didn't have the right to arrest me at all. I told you. You didn't." They're like, "Well, if you would have just given us your name." He's like, "You didn't have it. The judge told you today you didn't have the right to get my name. I was right." And he's like, "When do I get out of here?" And they said, "We'll get around to it." This guy was wrongfully arrested. He was vindicated by a judge. His release order came in hours ago, and he had to wait for me to get booked. And then I think it was another hour and a half to 2 hours after I got booked before this guy got released, because they were just mad that he didn't tell them his name. But I guarantee you that guy got fingerprinted. And eventually his name came up at his, at his hearing when he said, "Judge, they got the wrong guy." And they found out that they actually did. So his name and fingerprints are in there. This guy might have already been in the system. I don't know. But if he wasn't, he is now. So now the government has his name, his fingerprints. He's got an arrest record from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minnesota. And, an employer is going to look that up and be like, "You were arrested for this." Like, but they had the wrong guy. I got him. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's actually true. You might've just weaseled your way out of it. And it's crazy because the government thinks they're entitled to every piece of information about you that they want. And the only people who kind of buck that trend are people who know their rights and actually stand up for them. But it's fucking scary to do for normal people. You have to be an asshole.
Completely.
And it's hard.
Clients I represent, they're the most innocent. The reason they got to the place they got was because they believed in the system. They complied, they cooperated, they provided everything possible. And then realize the system interprets cooperation as conciliation, as conceding that the state is right and the individual is wrong. They don't take it in the way that ordinary people assume they will. And the number one most common factor in the most innocent people I've ever represented is that they were naive and idealistic about the system. By contrast, clients that I have that don't get into much trouble in the first place, or that get out of it quickly, are the most cynical. They're the most aware of how corrupt the system is. They know how to work that against the system and make sure that, your Bill Clintons of the world ain't going to jail. The people that go to jail are the most innocent, ordinary schmucks who get in the wrong place at the wrong time. And
they say, well, you plea out, or we go after you for 15 years, 20 years, whatever. It's like, well, what's the plea? 18 months?
Exactly.
I got a kid I got to take care of. I got this, I got that. 18 months, probably not too long. I can rebuild. 15 years, you don't know if you're going to make it out. Maybe the people in prison aren't going to let you out. 18 months, maybe you can negotiate where you go based on the plea deal. There's a lot of factors that go into making a plea deal real enticing for people. And and then the other thing you think about is, again, if people have seen the Minnesota sentencing guideline, in my case, for example, the presumptive sentence is a stay of execution, which means that they may sentence someone. Like if I were to go in and be found guilty right now, they would sentence me to some level of some months. I think it's 44 or 48 months under the sentencing grid, but that would be presumptively stayed by the judge, which means I don't go to prison. I go home, and then I have a set of probation conditions. Well, that becomes a lot more likely if you agree and plea. But if you go to trial, they'll say, you know what? Maybe there's a factor that we can push on here. Maybe there's some aggravating thing that we can get the judge to overcome the presumption of the stay. Maybe you're dangerous to the community. Maybe this, maybe that. And you go, whoa, wait, like, so I either stay home and I have a year, 2 years, 3 years probation, or I actually go to prison. And people are faced with that decision. And if they don't have the money to fight that, and they don't have, maybe they get a good public defender, but probably not going to have a public defender with the time to invest in their case. Maybe they get one. They got to go, I roll the dice on this, and the state gets mad that I fight for my rights, and then I go to prison rather than going home. But when the state does that and they get these people to do these plea agreements, they're like, look, you don't have to go to prison. You're not dangerous. But they do get a felony conviction. They take your guns. They take your voting rights. They take your liberty. They put you under these conditions. You can't leave the state without permission. You have to report into a probation or parole officer. They may add conditions like you can't do certain things. Maybe you can't drive. Maybe you can't have alcohol. Maybe you can't have nicotine. Who knows what it is? They just have all of this authority to do it. And they just completely obliterate your natural liberty just with the threat of, well, if you don't do this, you go to prison. But the government still gets to take your rights. And that's, unfortunately, a lot of prosecutors really love the idea of getting that win. For them, it's a win. It's a bonus. They did a good job. They're not looking at it from a justice perspective. Not all prosecutors, but a lot of them. And it's the system that makes them that way. They don't have to be bad people.
Oh, well, I'll use two examples. So coming out of law school, I wanted to be a prosecutor because your only ethical duty was to do justice. And I thought that was awesome. All I got to do is do justice. I have no other limitations. So me and a couple of buddies of ours who did well in law school kept applying for prosecutor jobs. And a buddy of mine at Wisconsin Law School ran the prosecutor's project at law school. So we knew every prosecutor in the state. We could not even get an interview at any prosecutor's office anywhere in the country. And then we would see people that we knew in our class who finished towards the bottom of our class, who would never want to be a prosecutor, not only get interviews, but get jobs. And so like 5 years later, I came back to talk to the other prosecutor's project. And while my last year in law school, he kept giving me books about why you don't want to be a prosecutor. So, I got the message from him, but I was like, I get the bureaucratic burdensome, et cetera. I want to do justice. And he felt embarrassed. And he said, well, Robert, they're not really looking for people like you. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? He goes, and basically explained it was what I've now called the Snowden problem. They don't want anybody who's self-reflective. They don't want anybody who's independent. They don't want anybody who's conscientious, because then the whole system can fall apart. What happens when you have a prosecutor who second guesses the cop, second guesses the judge, second guesses his boss, second guesses the basis by which even a kind of prosecution is taking place? Maybe thinks a certain criminal case really isn't worth being a crime in the first place. All of a sudden, the whole system unravels. You can't have an Ed Snowden saying, why are we spying on everybody? Isn't that supposed to be illegal? Why are you lying? Because all of a sudden they might go public and blow the whistle on the world. And so they deliberately make sure the kind of people they hire. There's a federal judge who actually wrote this piece in Chicago some years ago. And he said, look, the only kind of people who can be judges are the people who are deferential to the system. They're not going to make somebody a judge who spent look, if I try to find all the criminal defense lawyers who become judges, find all the constitutional civil rights lawyers who become judges, they don't exist. It's corporate lawyers, government lawyers, prosecutors, bureaucrats, people who defer to the system, who've proven a lifetime of loyalty to the bureaucracy, loyalty to the royal elite of our class. And I'll give another example. On Thursday, I will be in Pennsylvania with a judge who, by the way, wouldn't even give me a one-day continuance so I could see Trump speak here at the convention. This was the same judge, by the way, who, when I appeared in the case, the trial was scheduled for the very next day. And I was like, could we have just a 2-week continuance? He said no. And I was like, could we have a 2-day continuance? No. I was like, could we have a 24-hour continuance so I could at least fly in and not have to try the case immediately? No. That's who this judge was. The case is even more insane. It's a nice middle-aged lady who grew up in Estonia, came to the United States, married a very wealthy man in Pennsylvania. They still get along great. They had a divorce, very amicable divorce, but the law firm involved in the case was a corrupt law firm, deep ties to the Biden family, et cetera. They wanted to deny her the benefit of the agreement that she had reached with her husband.
Right.
And so in Pennsylvania, they had passed a law that was really meant to be, don't try to intimidate witnesses by filming them in court and broadcasting on social media, stuff like that. But the judges had interpreted it to mean they now have a monopoly on the public record. Nobody can take notes without their approval. No court reporter without approval. No broadcasting or publishing ever. No recording it yourself. Well, she figured out the court reporter was corrupt and working with the corrupt law firm. So she's from Estonia. She knows what corrupt government looks like. She escaped the Soviet Union. So she goes in and records the proceeding, but does it without broadcasting it. And guess what happens? The court reporter falsifies the transcript again. She reports that the court reporter did so. Now you look at the court reporter. The court reporter might have been like not a deliberately corrupt person, but their paycheck is by these powerful law firms and judges. Yep. They're not going to report in such a way that makes those law firms and judges look bad.
And all it takes is a word or two.
Exactly. So she just, a few little words here and there that made the law firm look good, the judge look good, and her look bad. And her little tape recording proved they were lying. So she sends in a copy of the tape. The local court clerk conspires with the local judge to get her referred to the local prosecutor for criminal prosecution for unlawful recording of her own court proceeding. She gets prosecuted. She tries to challenge it through the whole process as pro se until the very end. She hires me. Says, hey, look, I want to assert my constitutional rights. I think this law violates my First Amendment rights, my rights under the Pennsylvania Constitution for open access to the courts, et cetera. She's denied that. We go to trial, every remedy available. She's denied every witness I asked for. Denied. Every line of defense, denied. Every jury instruction request, denied. So the trial is as fixed, frankly, as it could be, in my opinion. So the jury, I get 3 jurors on my side. I get 9. They're like, the government accused her. It must be a crime, because that's the ordinary perspective of the ordinary juror.
Yep.
Right? So they hold out for a couple of hours, scare the prosecutor for a little bit, but then they come back in, and the honest jurors fold, because this is what normally happens. Unless you're extraordinarily strong in spirit, it's tough to stand up to your fellow members of a jury. You need 4 or more to win an acquittal, not with a conviction. You'll find people aggressively, the authoritarians can't wait to get on the jury and do the government's business and lynch the person they get to point the finger at to lynch. And so they come back, they convict. We're going to have the sentencing on Thursday. The prosecution is demanding that an extended probation time, way past the norm. She has 0 criminal history. It should be just a time served and day in jail, and that's it. But they're demanding at least a year probation. And guess what they're demanding? Re-education camps. In addition of probation, she has to go to mental health treatment, confess everything to the shrink, and abide by anything the mental health director says. I mean, this is pure re-education camp through disguised as criminal sentencing punishment. And not only that, they're demanding that she be additionally punished because she asserted her right to trial, because she asserted her Fifth Amendment rights. They're like, she didn't talk to the pre-sentence investigator. I was like, I told her not to, because it's Fifth Amendment. We're appealing the case. So I'm not going to have her talk to anybody when she has a Fifth Amendment right. The Fifth Amendment right doesn't disappear because there's a conviction. We're appealing it. But they're saying asserting her right itself against self-incrimination should be used. Judge, punish her harsher. The fact she went to trial and asserted her right to trial by jury, increase her punishment, and included in her punishment re-education camps. This is how sick the system has become.
Yeah, it's funny. Again, I seem to have some personal experience with this, but they utilize agreements, they utilize systems, they utilize whatever they can to do that, to create your compliance with their version of the story. That's the nefarious aspect of it. I saw a case where one
all over again. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what all the confessional state is about. They care more about the confession than whether the confession is true.
Yes. Yes. And that's what I was getting to. I've seen a case where one of the government workers was just demanding to hear the story. They're like, well, I'm not going to get to know the story. I'm not going to get to know the story if they don't talk. It's like, but it's not your job to know the story. Like, it's your job to make the case with facts. But they want the story, and because they're just like everybody, they're drama hounds. And if they don't know the story, if they don't know how it happened, they feel left out. They miss something. They miss part of the movie. And that's the weird and sort of sick way the system works. And importantly, I'm saying the sick way the system works on people is because people have a natural desire to want to know what happened. And then they play on someone else's desire to want to justify why something occurred. And you're like, well, just tell me the story. I'll help you. I'll help you. I'll help you. And as you know, government workers love to tell you how much. Just tell me and we're going to help you. Barnes, how many people have just told the government and the government's just helped them in your experience? Have you ever met one?
It never happens. And it's this underlying psychological need. I tell people, study the Inquisition, not just for its historical pertinence and risk, but it's the way the state operates and is incorporated to operate. They want the confession for their vindication of their actions. They don't want the confession for its truth. They don't want the hardest thing I have to tell clients early on. I was like, the government doesn't care about truth. The government doesn't care about morality. It cares about securing justification and vindication for the power of government. That's what it is organized and orchestrated to do. They have been selected for that precise job because they have proven themselves loyal servants in that regard. And it always throws people off. They're like, what? They don't care about what really happened? They don't care about what's honest, what's honorable, what's like the Amish are this way. They're always shocked. Like, I'm representing a guy right now, an ordinary farmer. A lot of them have dog herding operations, dog farming operations. As a supplemental income because the dairy economy is always up and down.
It's a puppy mill.
Yes, that according to the animal rights nuts. That's exactly
right. Well, you can't. There's a certain amount of puppies we will allow you to breed. If you breed more puppies than that, then we'll say you're mistreating them inherently, not actually. The presumptive mistreatment based on an arbitrary number is what tips the scales for a puppy mill. And how dare you, because the ASPCA, the local animal shelter, they have all these dogs that you could take. And you're like, but I'm a fucking American. I want a purebred corgi or whatever you want from and like, I don't care if it comes from a puppy mill or not. And they're like, how dare you? These conditions, like, you're not at this place. Like, I visit this place. I see all these dogs. They look like they're in kennels for a little bit or whatever, but they look fine. They're healthy. They're fed. They're certified. But they're like, no, we got to shut this place down. And they'll do this. They'll set up a narrative. One of the others that I know you have some experience with, or I should say, I'm pretty sure you have some experience with this, is homeschooling. And it goes back to the Amish thing. When they can outgroup and stigmatize something that is merely an alternative to the government system. My God, I have never seen so many foul looks as having to take the homeschooling letter, intention to homeschool, into the school superintendent's office in our area. And they go, because they hand you a big packet that they say you have to fill out. But in Minnesota, you just have to have a very basic letter that says, we intend to homeschool. Here's a child, here's their age. That's what we're going to do. And you go hand them that letter and they're like, where's the packet? You're like, yeah, I don't actually have to do that. There's a law that says that this is what I have to do. And here you go. And they look at you so offended that you are not entering their school. They're like, so you're not going to have your child in our school? No. Why? I don't really want to. And they look at you again. It's just like, but you have to do it this way. It's how everybody does it. And it's all of these systems. It's just their lives, you have to realize, are justified by their professions, like so many are, but their profession is the state. And if you just are outside of that state system, just like the Amish, you're done. You are anathema to their reality. Like they can't comprehend you not sending a child to school. They're like, well, what's kid going to do all day? It's like, fuck off. You don't get the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's two things that stand out. So one is that they've been sort of taught that these outsiders are threats, right? It's the heresy mindset. And if you study the old witch trials, the Inquisition trials, etc., everybody's conditioned to think that person's dangerous and scary. So if anything pops up on the scene that can accuse that person, they rush to it and pre-conclude it. The second part is with the Amish, is because they always deal with each other honestly. I always call it confession through projection. And that works both ways. One is bad people will accuse you of their sins. So you'll get a lot of confession through projection that way. The other part is good people will attribute their good traits to evil people because they will assume, well, I would engage honestly, so surely they are. And the number one thing the Amish are shocked with in dealing with the government is how often the government lies to them about little things, about everyday things. So there's one guy, this one person comes to him and says, hey, you can set up a kennel. Occasionally your animals might be just above the number. I know it fluctuates. And don't worry, you'll have 2 years to get it ready. It's real flexible. So as long as you sign these documents here, we'll make it easy for you so everything will be fine. And then they use the fact that he relied upon them to charge him with misdemeanor crimes and not only deprive him of the Amish farming, but try to put him in jail and charge him a bunch of fines. The same with Amos Miller. The thing Amos keeps coming back to me is, how do they lie to me, Robert? They can't lie to me. I talked to this guy and he said he was going to do this and this. And then they go to he goes, how do they do that? I was like, welcome to the government. They're not Amish, Amos. And they don't even comprehend it. I remember I was sitting around with a bunch of Amish. And one of the Amish was like, you say a lot of nice things about the Amish. Well, we're not that good. And I'm like, that's exactly what a good person would say. And they all broke out laughing. But they can't even conceive. I mean, they still play games like Underground Railroad, right? When I was sitting there talking to them, I realized not only do they not know any of the Hollywood references that I'm making, any of the cultural TV movie, but when I would tell them, man, if your kid was going to public school, they'd be coming back and the boy would be telling you he was a girl and the girl would be telling you he's a boy. And they looked at me like, what is wrong with you? Where are you coming up with this thing? Because they have no idea. They don't read any of the media. They're not on social media. They don't have cell phones. They don't go to public schools. And I was like, and it's amazing when I'm on those farms, I feel freer than I'm anywhere else. It's like being in Switzerland or New Zealand. It's so naturally refreshing. But I realized the other component is the people are so good. They're so happy. They're always singing and they're always getting along well and they trust one another. And I was like, they were teaching us what we used to believe in, what we used to know. Like they don't believe in indoctrinating their kids at all. It's how they live. They don't focus on their history. They don't focus on broad courses. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. None of that. Their focus is on live like we do. Celebrate family, celebrate community, celebrate the farm, celebrate carpentry, celebrate what's organic and natural, celebrate God and our religious traditions and spiritual traditions. But don't be judgmental. Don't be too harsh. Don't be too mean. Don't be too vindictive. Don't be too vengeful. Don't be too greedy. Don't look for things. The reason why they don't seek public attention is they believe that's seeking attention to oneself is bad. And that's why their lives are so much better than ours. But to the state, they're these dangerous, scary heretics that are up to something sneaky, undoubtedly. So anybody who points the finger in their direction, they can't wait to rush and accuse them. And they think when they lie to them, they're not really lying to them. They're doing God's work, just in an indirect method, like an undercover informant would do. And it's how you get this mismatch between what the state wants and what is actually true, what is actually principle, and what are actually good people.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I always try to apply Hanlon's razor. Gets harder and harder. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by incompetence. And one of the things I've been preaching up to my arrest and after my arrest as much as possible is like, it's not that the people are necessarily evil. It's that the system creates an evil environment that people with good intentions, their intentions can get warped into any number of ways that boil down to basic humanity of self-preservation, self-provision. Look, I want to have a good life for my family, blah, 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 blah. And they got to keep their job and they got to keep quiet. You got to keep your nose down. I love when you're talking about judges earlier, it's like you've never seen a successful criminal defense attorney become a judge, really. And my friend Ty Beard would say, well, they'd never want to take the pay cut. But see, getting a judgeship as a prosecutor is never a pay cut. that's going to be a pay increase, and it's going to be a cemented position. It's just the way that government works. It's the way government entices people into a system that perpetuates itself. We're going to give you, if you're a federal judge, we're going to give you a lifetime appointment. You're going to get a cost of living increase that's going to be reasonable. It's going to be damn near impossible to fire you. You get to have control over other people's lives. And if you get appealed and you lose, worst thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a news story and no one's going to remember who you are anyway, because there's 1,000 other federal judges. And outside of people who do this heavy research, you can coast through on that job for a really long time. You don't have to have aspirational, ideas of becoming a Supreme Court justice or whatever. You can just make quite a bit of money, have quite a bit of power and influence. And people who like that sort of structure, who thrive in a government position, man, that is the dream. Wait, I can never be fired unless I like murder someone. And even then it's questionable. I can never be fired. I can get good pay forever. And the worst case is someone might disagree with me and tell me I was wrong. And I go, sorry. And you can't be sued ever.
And it naturally attracts sociopaths and psychopaths.
Just like college professorships, which is the same thing with tenure, really. Like,
or like I used to explain this with priests. Like, it was like why priests and elementary school teachers have a disproportionate rate of child abusers. I was like, it's access. I learned this actually from a cop in New Haven. So I was going to move off campus at Yale, and I went to the local police station and asked them, okay, where's safe, where's not? And the cop said, think like a criminal. You'll know what's unsafe by looking at, if you were a criminal, would you think it's safe to commit a crime there? He said, crime is almost all opportunity. Mm-hmm. Take away opportunity, you'll take away crime. So he ended up telling me this one place that I thought would be unsafe, ended up being very safe for these reasons that it denied opportunity. But he's like, apartment buildings, huge risk because of the staircases, because of the areas with the shadows, because you have a concentration of people often alone in an isolation, and you can show up there without any major suspicion. And I describe people who seek out judges. I learned this when I went to a special governor school project in Tennessee. And the governor created this little project for working class kids across Tennessee to go to this special thing for international studies, and got to see Jesse Jackson and Maya Angelou and meet all these cool people. It was an amazing thing. But one of the things they did early on is they were teaching about currency and power. So they put us all in a room together. And the way in which the game worked, I realized the people most likely to seek power when you give a small group of people monopoly on power are the people you least want to have that power, because they're the most psychotic, that they love power more than they love anything else. And secondly, they're willing to do anything to get that power. And I was like, that's going to be the worst human beings in this room. And it was like, that's why I tell people this is where my anarchistic tendencies come from. I was like, I realized that people who want concentrated monopoly on power are almost always going to be the worst humans amongst us. They're going to, and we've all experienced this, right? Are there honest, honorable cops that want to do a good job? Of course there are. But the corrupt cops are the ones that get rewarded and empowered. The judiciary is 10 times worse. The people who want to become judges, who succeed at becoming judges, the very reasons that motivate their capacity to seek success and obtain it, makes them the worst people to get it. It's like when I seek a judge's disqualification. I used to say the problem is, especially when judges in the federal system get to decide their own disqualification, I was like, the judge who would disqualify himself is the judge that I want. Because that one's going to say. He's so honest, so conscientious, so self-aware that he's willing to disqualify himself for the mere perception of prejudice. Whereas by contrast, the judge who really needs to recuse himself will never recognize the need to recuse himself for that very reason. So we've created these systems of power that empower the worst amongst us to do the worst possible things. And we're just experiencing it in people's, and the only thing the system has got away with is keeping it limited how many people it screws. And the great mistake was trying to do it to Donald Trump and educating the world.
So real quick, talk to me about Baldwin, the Brady violation. Do you agree with the decision? I know Andrew Branca has said legally the judge made the incorrect decision, but I haven't watched his reasoning as to why. I usually find him to be insightful, and I have a feeling it has something to do with the harmless error doctrine, but I don't want to put that on him. But can you talk about what a Brady violation means? Just kind of a high level overview, and in Baldwin's case, what happened? Because I think it's Look, I think Baldwin was guilty as shit, but I also think it's hilarious that the state screwed up bad enough that his case was tossed. And I think that should happen more often.
I think two things can be true at the same time. To the extent what Bronca's pointing out is that 99 times out of 100, this particular Brady violation never results in dismissal with prejudice is true.
Right.
That doesn't mean it shouldn't be 100 times out of 100 that they're dismissed. So my view is I'm a big believer in Brady and Giglio, and I've seen it not enforced in state and federal courts all the time. I've had cases with egregious violations. And for those people that don't know, it's basically simple. The government, if they have notice of information that could be critical to your defense, then they have to produce it in a timely way so you can incorporate it in advance of trial, including what evidence you call, what opening statement you present, what jury instructions you request, all of that. It impacts all your strategic decisions. To get it in the middle of trial does not help you. You need, at least not at the level you need. So their job, now my view has been one problem is they've often allowed the prosecutor to decide what's helpful to your defense.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, no, just turn over everything. Why don't you just try that?
Exactly. An open file is what honest, ethical prosecutors have decided. They've decided whatever evidence comes into our file, we turn over. Now, a problem there has been that your corrupt prosecutors have decided the way to avoid that problem is to make sure it never goes into the file. So in the case, here's what's not in dispute.
They have off-record conversations. They don't put things in writing. And here's the hard part that people kind of miss, because again, people think of the legal system on this series of principles and rules. But what do you do when you don't know that the rule's been broken? Like that's a really crazy aspect of it. I've seen a case where an officer, a police officer, was advising a witness on how to make a report outside of the law enforcement system to protect the witness's identity, to keep the defendant from having that information. Because if they did it this way, it would be released. If they did it the other way, it would be concealed from the defendant. So it's a cop advising a witness in a criminal case how to avoid being identified by the defense, because if they're identified, then the defendant can look into their statement and discovery. They can start to raise issues. They can start to question the credibility of the statement or of the person. They can do all the research that discovery is for. And yet, if you don't know that that's happened, if you don't somehow find out that the police officer has done this, and finding out is only if they screw up. If you don't find out that they've done this, you'll never know that there was more information, and you don't know it's in that conversation that they didn't record, and you don't know any of this. And you're sitting there going, well, what the hell? You don't know if the police officer coached the witness, told them what to do. You don't know if the police officer ordered them to do something and then they acted as an agent of the state. You don't know any of this without somehow that information coming out. And if the prosecutor's the one with the duty to give it to you, and it's not in their interest to do so.
Oh, completely. And the way I describe it is what I've tried to teach young legal interns and law students who work with me over the years. Is I said, the number one thing you need to know is what's not there that should be there, and learn to read that information. So I had a case, for example, that I said, let's put together how this information came about, who it came from, how the reporting came from, and let's learn all the little tricks they have in their coding entries about when they code things at the top, this means this, this means this, this means this, in terms of like where they place things in files, etc. And we were able to figure out that they had actually taken reports from different reports, put them together to make them look like they're one report, to create a completely fake narrative and fake story in multiple levels. It turned out they had fabricated 2/3 of the evidence in the case, but all the prior defense lawyers had completely missed it because they took for granted the accuracy of the information they were getting.
Yep.
Rather than look at what's missing. And often what's missing doesn't make sense. Like, how did this come about? How did that? So I had another case that was like a live version of The Wire. Like what happens on The Wire? They do a wire, but they don't get authority to do the wire. So they disguise it as a confidential informant is giving them. The government loves to do this routine.
Oh man, I love that one.
course. And they love to take it apart in such a way and put it together in such a way. But here's what I was telling you. It's the old lesson. What webs we weave when first we set out to deceive. It's like sitting around a poker table and you learn that it's tough to maintain a lie. Even for a poker player, sophisticated, well-educated in the skill of poker, for a single hand of poker, they will have great trouble lying hand, part of the hand to the next part of the hand to the next, from the flop to the turn to the river to the pre-flop. It's tough. It's not easy to do. And what you learn with corrupt cops and rogue cops is that they will weave a story that if you know what should be there that isn't, you can put together, hold on a second, something is missing here, something is up here. But for example, let's say you don't want to do an honest probable cause affidavit, and you have a problem of submitting if you submit.
No, that's never happened, Barnes.
Of course not. The key, if you're a cop, is you have an obligation to put in anything that's material to the case. So material omission can do you harm. This is another variation of the Brady issue that rogue cops and rogue prosecutors, how they've learned to handle it. So what you do is you don't investigate, because you don't have to report something that you don't know yet. So what it is you don't you don't interview anybody. You don't go out and do a personal review of anything, because then you can't be accused of material omission, because you never talk to the people who could contradict the narrative you want to spin.
Yep.
And that's how they do it in search warrant affidavits. That's how they do it with Brady cases. They will deliberately not talk to witnesses that could undermine their case, or they'll talk to them off the record, fail to take notes of it, fail to put in the file. But I'll give credit to the Alec Baldwin prosecutor, because that lady, I watched her. I disagreed with Bronca on the case against Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. I saw that. Now, part of it probably comes from my background. I saw that prosecutor, and I thought, this lady's one of the nastiest human beings I've heard talk. She reminds me of every corrupt prosecutor I've ever dealt with. She has one of my favorite all-time defense lines that I'm going to steal in the right case was Jerry Spence in his last famous case. Got up in front of the jury, and he says, this prosecutor wants you to see the case with just one eye open, and it's the evil eye. I was like, that was genius at so many levels. Because remember, he represented that Michigan lawyer that was legally, he committed the crime. There was no doubt. He laundered money for campaign contributions to help out. And not only did Jerry Spence get them acquitted, the jury went out and had champagne with him later. I was like, that's how good Jerry could be at it. But this prosecutor struck me that same way. And so it turned out what happened is right after, now I am suspicious about how this all came about, but after her trial, Gutierrez-Reed trial, comes forward and says, hey, I've got some bullets that I think come from the movie set, might even relate to the bullet that caused the murder.
Right.
So they know right away, the prosecutor, this could be a problem for them. Problem for just getting the conviction of Gutierrez-Reed, problem for the Alec Baldwin case. So they look at it and they decide, this is probably bogus. This is probably a planted story. Of course, if it was planted, that's even double reason to include it in evidence, because it means Baldwin's lawyers know about it. But they convinced themselves that Baldwin's lawyers didn't know about it. So how do they deal with it when they have an open file policy relatively in Santa Fe, Albuquerque, in Nevada, and I'm sorry, New Mexico, is they decide to put it in a fake file. They don't put it in the Rust file. So not only do they not put it in the Baldwin file, they don't put it in the Gutierrez-Reed file, they don't put it in any file related to those cases, into the Rust file itself. They create another completely bogus file to stick it in. So that, what are they worried about? They're worried about some clerk, like Googling, or some little assistant prosecutor or some little intern that says, okay, let's make sure we got all the file transfers, finding it and sending it over. So they systematically and institutionally corrupted the process to guarantee Baldwin's lawyers would not see evidence they thought might be exculpatory. Now, what Bronca's point is this evidence is traditionally not seen as sufficiently exculpatory to warrant dismissal. Maybe a mistrial for a new trial, but usually you say, hey, this is what a typical judge does. Hey, defense lawyer, can't you incorporate this into your case? What is irredeemable prejudicial about you only finding out about this now? Can't you incorporate it in your trial testimony? And is it necessarily material? Because maybe it doesn't support your defense. Your client still pulled the trigger. Isn't that really the problem more than the bullet?
Right.
So I get Bronca's point, but to me, that's because our judicial system is so routinely corrupt.
I agree.
If you go to these great shenanigans to hide evidence, you must be punished with dismissal, or you will have prosecutors and cops doing it all the time.
And they do.
I'm suspicious about the judge. No way this judge dismisses the case for anybody, but how better to handle the case? In fact, you could say maybe the prosecutor's all in on it. Hey, we'll mislocate the evidence. We'll let you know right after the trial starts. You get to go to the judge. We did our job to try to hold you accountable, but golly gee, we just made this mistake. And a judge who's morally righteous about dismissing these corrupt cases, to my knowledge, has never dismissed a single case based on these grounds in history.
Yeah, I heard that it's never happened from this judge. Never dismissed a case on a Brady violation.
So it's because it's Alec Baldwin. That's why. So people's criticism, and this is just because Alec Baldwin's fair, but it doesn't change that the corruption of prosecutors should never be rewarded and must always be punished, or it will happen to everybody.
I agree. And that's the interesting thing. BLT was asking in the chat, he had a valid question. It's like, well, how do you find this out? And my answer to him, and you can certainly tell me I'm an idiot or I'm right and very brilliant, but it's this is why I think public defenders who can be really, really good lawyers often can be a disservice to a client. You have to spend time. It's just time. You have to read and read and read. There are probable cause affidavits that do exist in the world right now with a whole bunch of clues as to a whole bunch of things being left out of the probable cause affidavit. And you go, when you start reading it and you read it the first time, you go, wait a minute. Like your brain made a bunch of connections, and cops are very good at doing this. Your brain made a bunch of connections of steps that you assume must have happened to get from one sentence to the next sentence to the next sentence to lead you to this claim of probable cause. But you read it again and again and again, and then you notice, well, here's something that's weird. This is missing how this part gets to this part. And there's a way that this thing happened. I started investigating. It's like, well, there's a difference there. This is a time that's passed and no explanation for why this thing leads to this thing. Were you assigned the case? Did someone talk to you about it? Did you take a special particular interest in it? Was there an informant or a concerned citizen? And if those aren't in there, if you don't know how A to B happened in the probable cause statement, now there's something else that's missing. But the trick is, when you read these things the first time, you do a glance over and you're like, okay, this story makes some sense. And it's as you spend time reading and reading and reading. The other way you find out about this is the defendant is they are the best source of the actual facts, the reality of the situation. So when the defendant, if they're cognizant of their own life and their own situation, if they were conscious, if they know their story, they can be a very good resource to say, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. Or how would this thing happen in this way and not this other way? Logically, it should happen this way. So if you've got a good resource of the facts and you do a careful read over and over and over again, that's when you start to find clues that there are holes in the story. Like you said, you have to figure out where something is not there. And that is just time. Time is how you have the best lawyering, at least at this part of the trial. I mean, certainly, a great trial lawyer who's got a great opening statement, great at cross-examination, all that matters. But prior to trial, pre-trial, it's literally research, read, and invest as much time as you can possibly put into it. Most people can't afford that time. Most people can't put that time into it themselves. They don't have the training. They don't know what they're looking for. And public defenders have 200, 300 files. And that's in slow counties. They don't have the time to spend 3 hours reading the probable cause statement multiple times. Then the next day, hit it again. Then wait maybe 2-3 days. Some new stuff comes in. They look at that probable cause statement again. They go, something's missing here. And I didn't know it until I saw this thing. Now that I see this thing, I know that they missed something, or more likely they left it out. So where is it? Can you elaborate on that? Did I miss anything?
No. I mean, that's exactly. And what I try to teach people is first learn what should be there. And like the best show that portrays this is the BBC version of Sherlock, right? Where he'll try to go and recreate. Yeah, exactly. And like live their steps. And by doing so, figure out what's missing, what isn't, what should be there that isn't, and it'll tell a story. It'll always narrate a story. And once you learn how to put that together, you can get into the mindset of the person that's writing or the person that's explaining something, the witness that's testifying or something, then you can start. Like a great movie for this is, if you want to see how this can happen innocently, Under Suspicion. Gene Hackman.
I haven't watched it. I'll watch it.
Oh, it's awesome in Puerto Rico. Morgan Freeman. And it's a cop who thinks he's working really hard to get the confession of a sophisticated lawyer as to a crime. And then you figure out in the end, it's very different than everybody thought. And so part of it's piecing together like what should be there versus what isn't. And for that, you need to know the methodology that the officers use, the traditional protocol that they employ, what they're trained and taught to do, and at whatever agency level. Like that case that I had where we figured out the documents were fake, they came from 8 different agencies. And we had to figure out all the different agencies' internal rules and all of it.
And it's signal to noise too. Like you get thousands and thousands of pages, and really it's about 250 pages that might be relevant, but going through 250 relevant pages and spending the time on those is a thick task. And again, every minute is money, and the legal system is just not, it's not equipped for people who are of modest means.
You have to be really skilled. So there's like that show, The Judge, that was on like Showtime or whichever one it was, the New Orleans Judge. It started out good and the show went down the tank. But early on, the judge goes out physically to the scene where the cop supposedly saw something. And he gets to relive it and realize where the flaws are. And you need that kind of attention to detail and that kind of understanding of how things operate. And that's why even the cheapest case is expensive from a time perspective.
Right.
Like a 4-page search warrant affidavit may have more things hidden in it than you can possibly. Like the case I had that were found the massive government corruption involving fake informants. I went to my client who was in custody and just asked him, hey, where did this? I just went through every piece of evidence.
Yep.
I didn't tell him it came according to the government from an informant. I just said, do you remember this? Do you remember this? Where did this come from? When did that happen? Who did that happen with? Because I was trying to put together for myself who the informant was.
Right.
And as he went through it,
because they don't have to disclose it, which is insane. Sorry, go ahead.
Completely. I'm going through it, and he's saying that's a conversation with this person. That's a conversation with a different person. And I'm asking him, okay, some things we're going to document. Well, where were those documents? Who had access to those documents? Where were they stored? Who else had access to that storage location? By the end of that 3-hour conversation with him, I knew that there was no informant, that the informant was a bogus cover for illegal black ops, sneak and peeks, stealing documents, and illegal wires. Now, the irony behind the wires is the cops weren't like all institutionally corrupt. It was the cop who needed overtime because he had bought a fancy home for his new girlfriend, fiance, out on a fancy island in Seattle. And he was ahead of the entire IRS undercover operations and wiretap operations.
Lovely.
So he needed to bill overtime. He didn't care about my client. But how is he going to claim that his overtime was legit? He needed real value for his overtime. So what he did, he just put a bunch of wires everywhere. He didn't do the overtime work and just went through and would say, hey, because of this overtime, I talked to undercover informant number 4, gave me this bit of intel. It was wire number 3, this thing, that thing. And we were able to put it all together because of it. And we got a judge who initially wouldn't allow us to get to know the informant, to demand an evidentiary hearing for the informant. And then the day before the hearing, the government needed a conference call with the court. And we're on the phone, and they're like, Judge, our informant, he fell off a roof and hurt his head, and now he's lost his memory. And even the judge fell off the chair laughing, because then we knew everything was fake and fraudulent. But the only way you do it is you need to be skeptical, and you need to learn what should be there that's not there. And that will be the biggest story.
Yeah. And it's all attention to detail and time. Something that some lawyers are really good at. And it's why the legal field is very diverse. Some people are really good at that and really suck at delivering trial arguments. Some people are really bad at contemporary legal research, but really great at analyzing and synthesizing Supreme Court cases and coming up with good arguments and good sort of analysis and forging new potentials for victory. And some people are just really good and standing in front of a jury, being super charming and saying, look, my guy didn't do this, right? Or the really dangerous ones are the ones who stand up in front of a jury and say, of course this guy did this. You knew he did this because you walked into this courtroom right now and you can see, based on the evidence I'm going to show you, that this guy is guilty. Let's go through it. Those people, like all of those different things, are why we can pump out thousands of lawyers from law school and still fill the jobs. But it's also why the best legal teams cost so much, because you need each of those types of people. And some people can fill 2 roles, but usually people can't fill all of them on their own. There's just not enough time. Speaking of time, can you give me 2 minutes? I got to go to the bathroom real quick. And please talk about your locals, because guys, if you are not on Viva Barnes locals, you are missing out. Great conversations from a great legal mind with so much experience. And he's going to give me a minute. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So there's 2 places I recommend with sort of independent information. So some people have asked what 1776 Law Center is about. So what we've done is, over the years, I went from doing 90% private practice, 10 to, maybe up to 20%, 80 to 90% private practice, 10 to 20% pro bono, to over half of the work that I've done over the last half decade has been pro bono or contingency with very low chance of recovery, because a lot of people needed legal representation and were being just crushed by the system. And we wanted to help out wherever we could. The goal was to make that a sustainable long-term model, to have something out there that's like the ACLU, but for ordinary people in places the ACLU is no longer working. And so we started the 1776 Law Center to do that. The 4 quadrants of interest and focal points where people needed representation in the court of law, needed representation in the court of public opinion, but for various reasons did not have the means to afford the best, most effective representation. So the goal was to create 1776 Law Center to serve in that gap. And the 4 areas where the gap had the most apparent and manifest need to us: financial freedom, political freedom, food freedom, and medical freedom. Now, a lot of people understand better now than ever before medical freedom. So we represent a lot of victims of the vaccine mandates. We're representing victims of the vaccines themselves, people who suffered disabling injury, some cases family members who died. And they've made the legal system very difficult to get relief or remedy. And we've been representing literally thousands of people to help get that remedy. Food freedom is about everybody. It used to be the case in the law, federal law across the country, that I could go down and buy food from a farmer without any government permission. Now you got to get government permission. We surveyed it, did a poll nationwide. It was one of the most popular issues in the country that said I should have a right to buy food from a farmer, whether it's at the farmer's market or at the farmer's personal farm, without permission from the government in advance. Political freedom embraces so much. It's about fighting the surveillance state, supporting people like Julian Assange and Ed Snowden. It's about supporting people like Kyle Rittenhouse, your right of your Second Amendment right. It's about representing people like the Covington kids when they're lied and libeled by the most powerful institutions and individuals in the country. It's about everything that goes into political freedom: freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of expression. And then financial freedom, crypto. For people that don't know it, there's been a war on crypto under the Biden administration. Bitcoin is financial freedom. Financial freedom is freedom from central planners, central banks, to give you the individual economic means to empower and give real sovereignty to yourself. And so 1776 Law Center is about representing all 4. If you want to stay up to date on those cases, on those topics, on those questions, on those poll results, you can go to 1776 Law Center and do it. And the goal is to give a sustainable organization that long past I'm put out to pasture is still here with good lawyers, with good people fighting the good cause.
There you go, guys. Definitely check out what Robert Barnes is doing. A real attorney doing real work, not just his wonderful commentary, but he's out there fighting the government at every turn for people who need it. And the amount of people out there who really do need help, and they never thought they'd be on the ass end of the legal system, never in their life. And it hits you like a train. You're never ready for it, no matter who you are. Well, unless you unless you have that history because you grew up in a really bad place doing really bad things, the average person is not ready for it. And when it hits you, you need people like Barnes. You need people like those they promote. Robert, someone in chat mentioned that you said the name of a website that reviews judges from lawyers. Can you repeat that?
So it's limited and it's not as kept up to date as it used to be. But one of the better ones is Robing Room. So Robing Room has some reviews.
I prefer the disrobing room.
Yeah, exactly. It used to be really good. It used to be really active. It still is decent. You'll at least get a little bit of information, particularly on judges who've been around a little. And if generally speaking, and also, by the way, all the judges' staff write favorable reviews. So you're looking for the skeptical or critical reviews. You can't necessarily trust the favorable reviews as being reliable, but skeptical reviews you can. Because I mean, I've made reviews on there, and then now you get to submit it anonymously, but the judge can respond to the account, but he doesn't know who it is he's responding to. Judges pay attention to it. Judges have sent me responses. So a lot of lawyers don't want to comment on it, but
Sure.
Only the lawyers that get really enraged at having a horrific experience, and it will tell you whether a judge is really bad. And what's been increased, I get that question probably more than anyone else. How do I know about my local judge for election? How do I know about my judge that's been assigned to my case? And it's been a project in the background. We're probably going to do it 1776 Law Center when the bandwidth opens up. Is I've always wanted to have a judicial review. I've also always wanted to just be, especially when I'm no longer practicing on a daily basis, to have an honest review of all judges, to just take these judges apart when they lie in cases. I just had a case out of the 10th Circuit where they went and the cops basically got pissed off that a couple of kids ran the car, took off from them because they panicked. So when they pulled over the car, that they crashed the car couldn't move. It was rolling backwards. They just got out, decided to summarily execute him, and shot 66 bullets into the kids. Killed one, disabled another, badly injured a third. None of the kids had any long extended criminal history. None of them had any guns on them. So they couldn't pretend the rest. So it seemed to me like a case of maybe excessive force.
Maybe. I mean, possibly. I don't know.
The magistrate comes up with excuses why the answer is no. The district court comes up with excuses why the answer is no. So we go up to the 10th Circuit. And instead of including an argumentative version of the facts, we just say, Judge, please, panel, please look at the video of the incident that we have. That's it. We're not going to argue the facts. Please look at the video. What do you think the Court of Appeals does? How dare you not argue the facts? Now we're not going to look at the facts or the video. And they decide to attack me for it. And they say, it's your duty to disprove the cop's qualified immunity claims. It's like, how do I disprove what the cop knew or didn't know when only the cop knows what he did or didn't know?
Yep.
It's judges just kind of frankly lying about the record. So I get these inquiries right away from legal publications saying, how did you get this? I was like, no, the judges are covering up for the corruption in the 10th Circuit that is covering up for corrupt cops by a ridiculous interpretation of a qualified immunity doctrine that judges just invented because it doesn't exist in the 1983 statute. And if you read the legal history of it, was never intended to be in that statute because something horrific happened that they know can never be justified by any honest, honorable person. So they look in the mirror, they see someone evil, they see someone bad, they see someone corrupt, and they point the finger at other people. And we're going to take it up on bond and take it up to the Supreme Court. But it's like, those are the kind of cases I would love to be writing. It's amazing. How is it there's nobody out there writing an interesting blog on corrupt rogue judges? All these lawyers, they have blogs on everything under God's green earth, but they don't have blogs on, let's listen to the dumbest decision made today. I was like, I would do a dumb decision of the day blog that just takes apart the corruption, the fraud, and the incompetency in our judicial system.
I can tell you why. Well, one reason, because if a lawyer who writes that blog has to appear in front of that judge, they know what's going to happen. Judges never do that, but they know what's going to happen. And that's just the reality they have to deal with is like, oh, sorry. So you have to eventually do it as a quote unquote retired lawyer. And then the next thing that happens is that judge signs a bogus search warrant someday. And when that happens, what do? Suddenly you have to fight. Suddenly you have to do something. Suddenly your life gets under the microscope because you said something about a judge and the judge didn't like it. And there's there's no way around that. If you have to appear in front of a judge, there's actually, and in some states, they have ethics boards, not rules, but they have boards who will extend those criticisms of judges into questionable ethics. It's like, wait a minute. Don't lawyers get to have an opinion about the judge's ruling? Don't they get to say it was legally wrong? Don't they get to do that? And the answer should always be yes. But these are egos with robes walking around. And at the end of the day, if you badmouth one specifically, they will be mad. If you badmouth them generally, they'll always know you're talking about every other judge. But right. But when you're talking about is like, well, why in their blog talking about corrupt judges? Because you'd have to write specifically about the corruption. You'd lay it out in front of them. There'd be no way for them to counter it, because if they start commenting publicly, they risk their own ethical endeavors, I'll say. And they just want to wait for you to be in front of them again. Instead, they're not going to ever counter your public argument. Oh, I don't stoop myself to that level. But yeah, sorry, there's no, you don't get that continuance, not even for a day.
Well, I mean, like, I learned this when I was a young lawyer, Chattanooga, and we had a case of a kid that was being badly abused. Right. He would describe in great detail horrific things that his father was doing. And so my co-counsel, who was this old, experienced, well-respected lawyer in the town, handled the case at the trial. He came back and said he ordered the kid to be with his father, despite the kid begging him otherwise. And I was like, how did this happen? He said, well, he fell asleep during most of the trial. And I was like, what the heck? I was like, this is outrageous. We got to do something. He was like, well, let me explain something to you, Robert. If we raise us think about this, every judge in this town is going to pay us back. Every single one of our clients will now suffer because we exposed this judge who has a health problem that leads him to fall asleep on the bench. And that was the day I realized I'm never going to be stuck in a local community to practice law ever again. I'm going to live in a place I don't practice. I live in Las Vegas. I don't practice law in Nevada. I'm going to practice everywhere. I'm going to build a Swiss mercenary model so that I can come in and say whatever I need to say about the prosecutor, about the local town, about the city, the county, the state, about the judge. Whatever I need to say, I can say, because chances are I'm never going to appear in front of that judge ever again. I'm never going to appear in that courthouse probably very often, ever again. But I realized it was the only way to practice that kind of law. Otherwise, you would have to compromise yourself in order to just protect your own clients in the future because of how systemically corrupt our system has become.
Well, it's amazing how difficult a judge can make your job just by, like you said, not granting a continuance. Sorry, you have to trial prep in a day rather than 2 weeks. And it's like, well, we have good cause. Like, there's new counsel. We need a little time to whatever. No, sorry, you're just not going to do that. Or they, they just deny motion hearings, or they just overrule objections. It's like, okay, well, you can take my overruled objection up on appeal. You're not going to win that appeal based on a judge wanting to hear more evidence. I mean, you might, but you're talking about a crapshoot for your client and infinite money. Again, in tens of thousands of dollars of someone else's money that has to come in, or you're doing it on your own and not earning that income. And so judges they have the ability to make your life exceedingly difficult and expensive without ever violating a law or an ethical principle or having any trail that they've done it. You'd never know. You'd never know if they did it. They just say, nah, overruled. And you're like, but judge, they can't do this. This is hearsay. It's like, yeah, it's probative. Like, and what do? You go to the appeals court and say, well, they let in this piece of hearsay. It's like, well, prove that was the thing that convicted your client or that caused you to lose. And there's no way you can do that. I mean, hell, the Trump case Alvin Bragg is running with the Stormy Daniels. Like, Judge Meacham, he suspended the sentencing hearing because they have to review all of the convictions now. But at the same time, like, the prosecution is out there saying, well, this Hope Hicks testimony was devastating to court. They're saying this in closing argument, drawing attention to the specific official acts testimony. And there's still legal scholars out there saying, yeah, this isn't going to win for Trump. It's not going to, because the judge is going to say, well, how do you know this is the thing? It's like, well, because the prosecution thought this was the most important evidence. They called it out, and they know that some judge could just go, and Meacham doesn't have a great track record of helping Trump out, but it's like, they know that he can just go, Yeah, actually, I don't see any reason that that's the critical evidence here, and that his sentences or his conviction should be overturned. And then Trump gets to appeal that to a New York appeals court. They're not going to take that, and then he has to go back up to the Supreme Court and hope that the Supreme Court has a reason to side with him. And this is 3-4 years down the road. It's insane. It's like, no, the court's like, we ruled on this. You've got official acts evidence. The prosecution clearly relies on it in their closing statement. They think it's important. That should be sufficient.
Well, completely. I mean, I remember my view still is that I oppose licensure in general, but I particularly oppose the idea that the judicial branch should be the legislative and executive branch when it comes to lawyers. Mm-hmm. Because who is going to know judicial corruption better than lawyers? Yep. And yet their ability to even practice their profession is controlled by that judicial branch that is the legislative branch when it comes to what rules are passed governing lawyers, the executive branch in terms of enforcing and prosecuting any so-called ethics violations by a lawyer, and the adjudicative branch to decide whether they're guilty or not. And so, I mean, they get to be jury, judge, and executioner in violation of the separation of powers. And it's like, I've never thought that should ever be constitutional. Of course, who do you complain to? The same judges that are violating the Constitution in the first place.
Yep. It's wild. Okay. Let me burn through some super chats and we'll wrap up the show in just a little bit here. James Walker says, Ricada is sounding great over the corn instrumentals tonight. Looking forward to hearing from Barnes as well. Miku Huntu says, I hope you're right, Barnes. RNC OF speaker was, I don't know what the RNC, what's the OF speaker?
I don't know what the OF speaker is.
I don't know what that means. Desert Pirate says, my favorite pair, Rackets and Barnes. Thank you. Stormcrow says, hey, you did me a solid last year toasting my friend when he passed away. I appreciate that. My own family had a run-in with CPS when I was 10. You have my deepest sympathies. Hope things work out for you and yours. Thankfully, they are, and I'll be able to give updates on it when everything's kind of finalized. But thank you. I appreciate that. Mephisto's movie review says, love the movie talk, Nick. We'll have to do it again. Meantime, Google is suppressing the rest of this message. Guys, check out Mephisto's movie reviews. We talked through Glengarry Glen Ross, and we talked a little bit about American Beauty. Go check it out. It's up on his channel. It was a fun talk. I love talking movies.
David Mamet's one of the greatest screenwriters alive. He wrote Glengarry Glen Ross, Oleana. I mean, he was really the guy who Wag the Dog. I've seen his plays. He's a brilliant, if you listen to some of his master classes, brilliant narrator, brilliant understander of the world, has become sort of a populist, conservative-oriented guy because of how Hollywood's gone nuts. But one of the most, he wrote one of my favorite books out there, small book called 3 Uses of the Knife, to explain the neurological need for narrative. That was a better explanation for me to understand storytelling than anything I've ever read or reviewed, and was critically helpful to me in everything I do in the practice and profession of law. So I highly recommend it if you get a chance to read it. 3 Uses of the Knife, David Mamet.
Yeah, Mamet is a master storyteller. He's figured out the medium of both film and stage in figuring out how to cheat your brain into noticing a bunch of things that build the story without saying a word. In a book, you'd have to write hundreds and hundreds of pages. On the screen, you have 5 seconds to do it. And he's excellent at it. That's a lot of what we were talking about with Glengarry Glen Ross, one of the best scripts with one of the best casts ever put together. Amateur Ant says, Barnes is an ambulance chaser. Man, your legs must be tired. Sees the days as Nick Barnes. Now wake up and get Viva Dream Team. Pendar says, love me some Ricada and Barnes. Richard Koski says, how many money do you need to hit the goal? Always more money. Never hit the goal. Never hit the goal. Never talk about the goal. If you're talking about the goal, that's really weird. Vaz Kalma, given you've ruined your woman's name publicly forever, is it too much to ask for you to kick the side chick out and focus on her, that poor lady? Yes, it's too much to ask. Thank you. Jay says, 2 great minds. Is there any foreseen reciprocal violin playing to match the Democrats' violin playing? Or is everyone going to just clock in at work and complain as usual? What do you think?
I'm curious what the next step. I mean, the establishment, deep state, whatever language you want to use, they haven't had a plan B since 1975. They didn't have a plan B for Vietnam. They didn't have a plan B for Afghanistan. They didn't have a plan B for Iraq. They didn't have a plan B for Libya. They didn't have a plan B for Syria. They don't have a plan B for any aspect of Trump. So the scary thing is maybe they do something even dumber and crazier, like try to get to a war with Iran on some other pretext, or try to get to a nuclear conflict somehow with Russia or China. But I think they're all in bafflement at the moment. They don't, and from what we've seen over the last half century, they don't have a plan B, so they don't know what the plan B can be.
Yeah, it's I'm just wondering. I hope not. I'm always worried of the retaliatory move. I hope there's not a crazy Republican or whatever who's going to go after Joe, because that's the opposite of what needs to happen. Richard Koski says, thanks for having Barnes on. He's a legend. I agree. Squid says, why was Trump's Secret Service so understaffed? Because the Bush rally I went to in 2004 had 100+ agents on the ground with 2 per door at the arena it was at.
They told Trump's regular crew to stay home to give him time off. Then
Nice.
Jill Biden said she needed the best people, so it was a select limited crew that got sent. And it appears that select limited crew, at least some portion of them, may not have been on the up and up from the get-go.
Nah. Pendar gifted some memberships. Thank you. Mello says, can Mr. Barnes talk about the stochastic terrorism? And that's a long conversation. Maybe another time. Aloha from Kansas says, can we do a watch party of you two and Wag the Dog? Maybe.
Great film. Great film.
EW, one of the most patriotic things an American can do is not trust the government. I agree. Just read the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers. They're all in agreement on that one. Imager Ant says, Nick is right, but Nick is still a degenerate, lol, and Barnes is still an ambulance chaser, and I agree with both of them politically, SMDH. You're between a rock and a hard place, Anth. Debbie says, mahalo. Hey, what's up, Debbie? 2 of my favorites in one stream, keeping you and your family in my prayers, Nick. Thank you. Barnes, you're a real one, and I think you have a bigger influence on Trump Jr. than we know. Hence, JD Vance for VP. Aloha to you both. Aloha back, Debbie. Amateur Ant says, ask Barnes why Kyle Rittenhouse's lawyers got rid of him. It's because he's an ambulance chaser. Barnes never cared.
Oh,
Barnes,
there's Kyle, to his credit, has helped correct that aspect. So for those people who don't know the background, originally I was picked to represent Kyle in the court of public opinion. I continued to do that all the way through. At trial, I recommended bringing in a team, including the body language panel and some other people, to pick the jury. Richard Bears, very good pollster, etc. At the very last minute, people that were kind of managing Kyle at the time decided they didn't want our team. They wanted a different team. And so I stepped back and made clear I wasn't picking the jury, the team. I had been pitching to people, help raise money for Kyle so we can bring in this great jury trial team. And I didn't want anybody mad at me because that team ended up not being picked. That wasn't Kyle's choice. That wasn't Kyle's lawyer's choice. That was this guy who was.
Ooh, that guy's fun.
Yeah, I know.
I've dealt with that guy.
Yes. And Kyle has, been very generous about explaining how all that went bad for him. And he's been very appreciative of everything I did for him, Nick did for him, other people did for him, and dealing with that guy. And that guy, that guy had control of the funds, so he controlled everything at the time.
And that guy was running Kyle on what appeared to me to be basically a no-income media tour that ingratiated that guy with media powerhouses to get that guy access to places he wanted to go. And Kyle never has to endorse any of that. That's what it seemed like when I talked to that guy. And if you guys, one of the things I had said a long time ago, kind of as a joke, but kind of serious, was during the trial, I was like, Kyle, I can make you a millionaire right now. Let's open a YouTube channel of you reviewing guns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't say this to Kyle Rittenhouse. It was broadcast, generally speaking. But if you notice how long it took Kyle to be doing what he's doing now, he's a brand ambassador for several brands that have strong Second Amendment principles, that he's out there doing videos of, gun courses and stuff like that. That's the stuff he should have been doing from the moment he was acquitted. And there were people in the way of that. And that, I mean, you see how successful he is now. Imagine if he could have ridden the wave from the start. Guys like that were the guys preventing him from doing that for their own selfish purposes. And that's disgusting to me.
And part of the team I was bringing in included a Hollywood film director and some other people that could really financially stabilize things for Kyle and his family, because they come from very blue collar backgrounds, public news that you know, that his mom and his sister have experienced some financial difficulties. Kyle got wrongfully blamed for some of those things, by the way. He's tried to do everything possible to support his family as well. But what was happening at the time is that guy felt threatened by these independent people. So he brought in his own jury consultant. It was O.J. Simpson's jury consultant, and he thought he could sell that effectively. And Kyle and everybody else figured out that was a bad decision, because by the time, remember, the lawyers were forced to ask for a mistrial because they had no read on the jury, because the jury consultant given them such crap advice. They didn't know that 11 of the 12 jurors were for them and only one was against them. But because she had given such terrible advice, they almost blew up their own jury verdict of acquittals. And so not long after that, this person kept interfering in Kyle's well-being. I mean, Kyle was a kid. People put all this massive pressure on, and he figured it out.
Unfathomable.
Yeah, exactly. And he figured it out, got rid of him. He's a sweetheart of a human being. He's always been a sweetheart of a human being. But there's this, portion of people that try to go around and troll. I don't care. But Kyle is a sweetheart of a human being. Always was, always is, always will be. And there's never been any conflict between me and Kyle.
Kyle's great. I wish him all the success. I love seeing him actually getting these promotions and doing stuff, because I know for a while it was really, really difficult. And he kind of, I think he even said on my stream, it was like, basically, this isn't easy. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do next. And seeing him get success is awesome.
He's being sued all the time and defamed all the time and libeled all the time and threatened all the time. So the kid's been through hell and back.
Okay, there's a bunch of these from Buckmaster. It says, Nick, was Barnes the one who put you on to the prostitutions? No comment. That's attorney-client privilege. He says, when you went to Vegas, did John Barnes put you on to the dirty women that he loves? Yes, John Barnes did. Who's John Barnes?
I have no idea.
He says, when you asked Camelot about the prostitutes, was John Barnes the one who thought it was cool you do these degen things? Yes, again, when I asked Camelot about prostitutes, John Barnes popped up, and he was like, look, I know where they are. Buckmaster says, Nick doesn't get it. Barnes was probably the guy who put him on the pros while Nick as in Vegas. This guy really is thinking.
Well, I find fascinated. There are these two groups out there, and part of this has been, you have this whole group of people that in the modern age have become, they have no girlfriends, they have no wives, they have no jobs, they have no houses, they're stuck at home living with their parents. It's life is miserable for them. And this is a bad thing for civil society. You can't have 2/3 of men having no dates for a year under the age of 30. That does not end well. There's no society in which that has ended well. But they become sort of addicted to certain sort of social media, reality TV drama, where they can pick a villain and make that person a villain and feel self-righteous as they go after that villain. And then they also become part of it, like they brigade people's communities, brigade comment sections. There's a couple of people that follow me around still from the Nick Fuentes days. Whenever I do an interview, say certain things. It's like, I could care less. But they're attempted at times to intimidate, right? They're just a different kind of it, but it's like social media lynch mobs of a type. And why they think they're going to intimidate some of us, I don't know. But it's like, I'm not going to change my legal opinions for that. I'm not going to change my political opinions. Not going to change my activism. You can defame me everywhere, every place you want to. It's going to change zero impact. You can threaten bogus ethics complaints, certain people that run certain websites, FYI. It's not going to change my behavior. And if you lie and libel about me long enough, maybe I'll seek legal remedy myself. But it's mostly sad because they become addicted to developing drama somewhere, because they have really terrible lives. And they have terrible lives because our society is failing these people at scale.
It's one of the most interesting things that I've noticed is when you know the story someone is talking about, and they have their version of the story that they can't possibly know. They put it together from a set of like limited facts or whatever, but their version of the story is fucking horrifying. And you go, where do they come up with it? Oh, wait, that's what this person would do under this fact set, because that's how their lens to the world. And so they project that upon you, and they say, oh, he must be doing this X, Y, Z. And you're like, no, not at all. Oh my God. And you go, why would you think, oh, that's even worse. That's the scary part of sort of the, like, there's a level of laughable trolling. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who have downright fucking evil theories and thoughts. And it's like, this is what you would do given the opportunity. That's scary.
I tell people to use the confession through projection filter at multiple levels. It's very practical. It's very useful. Law, politics, other aspects of life. But interpersonal, like anybody comes up to makes like weird allegations. You're like, where in the world did you come up with that? That's not true at all. And then you realize that it's the old telltale heart. People have a need to confess the darkest thoughts in their brain, the darkest activity. I mean, look at what they've done with Trump. Almost everything they've ever accused him of, Joe Biden is actually guilty of. The Democratic Party is actually guilty of. Hillary Clinton, the whole nonsense of the New York criminal prosecution, it's Hillary Clinton's confession about how she laundered money through a law firm to influence an election illicitly. That's using New York City to do it. That's Hillary Clinton. It's not Donald Trump. And these people often confess the craziest things about themselves when they're busy attacking somebody else.
It's wild to see. But hey, that's the internet for you. Aloha from Kansas says, which is why I was so impressed with Baldwin's lawyer. Buckmaster says, Barnes knew Nick was fucking prostitutes and he probably put him on. Birds of a feather flock together. Barnes is no different. Buckmaster said, Nick, did you not worry about STDs when you mess around with pros? No, pros don't have STDs. What are you talking about? It's the non-pros that do. Buckmaster says, did Barnes put you onto the good pros in Vegas and you thought it was cool to keep messing with them while you're married? This guy has this story. The funny thing is, this all originates from a joke from Camelot. He was like, yeah, he's probably banging a bunch of. It's like, guys, he was joking. But now it's their narrative. Barnes is not married with 5 kids. Oh, I see. None
of that's accurate.
You got bamboozled by a John who wanted you to be like him. Yeah, actually, you guys don't know this, but Robert Barnes stayed up day and night just going, how can I make Nick Rekieta into me? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Buck says, this line is for you and the pros Barnes put you onto. Okay, thanks, man. That was, he celebrated his 20th super chat somewhere in there. Barb Rogers gifted a membership. TV's Will Heron says, thanks, Nick. Nicole FJB says, boyfriend punched the 3 times DUI driver who T-boned us while 5 months pregnant. DA tried convincing me he was abusive and easily angered. DUI is 2 years and no driver's license. Boyfriend 5 years. SS prob. I think you mean probation. Buckmaster says, Nick on Locals, who exposed herself the most for you? Was it Art's wife? No, it was Cynthia. The Squid says, sounds like the Karen Reed case was not only full of inept and corrupt cops that didn't actually investigate the case, but also chock full of Brady violations.
Okay, and I'll say, I recommend that defense lawyer. I mean, we've seen a bunch of cases over the last 10 years that, got social media coverage and you could actually see the trial. That defense lawyer was the best opening statement and closing argument I've seen of all of them. That guy is super skilled. I don't know whether he was willing to do it at cheap, because I can't imagine she had enough money to cover how much it cost to do that case. I mean, they took apart the social media presentation. They took apart every little, that cost huge. That was 7 figures into mid 7 figures, the cost of that representation. But that guy did a fantastic job. And it turned out all the conspiracy. Remember, that was the narrative. Oh, it couldn't be true because that required a conspiracy theory. You got to be a conspiracy theory idiot to believe the prosecution is telling you the truth. Yep. That allegation was ridiculous when you put it together. And it was, imagine she's an ordinary everyday lady, but because she happened to be the girlfriend of a man who happened to die on the front lawn of a prominent local cop, she ends up being the victim of a coordinated conspiratorial effort to put her in prison for their crimes.
And the people who reported on it, like Turtle Boy, suddenly are getting prosecuted like crazy, just full on going after a journalist in a naked attempt to silence him because he was pointing out the obvious fucking corruption.
Yeah. Well, I tell people, if you don't believe in conspiracies, explain to me what's happened to Donald Trump for the last 4 years.
No, that's a myth. Buckmaster says Art's wife was doing body paint, or was that someone else? Anyways, I'm sure making him a mod is the best you could do for him. Best I could do is you're a mod. Cat Randall gifted a membership. Buckmaster says, damn, Art, why did your wife want to expose herself to Nick so much when you guys are so amazing? Well, I'm handsome. He says, Art, just keep showing your wife like Nick. This guy has really got a thing. I'm sure she will write us a letter and say how you guys only want each other. Buck says, Art, remember how our lady wrote a letter saying how her and Nick are only for each other, and we find out Nick was watching some other guy bang her? You found that out? How? Oh my God. Brian Hack. Wolfgang Deo is now king of Russia and provided Secret Service training in Asia. Hawaii, now mainland. Hack 2024. Vote for the other guy. Buckmaster says Camelot We're almost through these. Camelot331, you were amazing. You told us how Nick was going out of his way to have messing with prostitute, ? Fletcher Boy says, I've had experience with alphabet agencies. Fuck them, they lie. Bad Dragonite says, Destiny is a girl's name. Cat Randall says, find your middle ground.
Crazy that guy's got.
He's weird.
I mean, but you go out and you celebrate a man being murdered, a fireman being murdered. I mean, does he not understand what the public reaction is going to be to that? That he's discrediting himself amongst a whole new audience? I mean, the Quartering's take was he thinks he's having a mental breakdown. But I was like, he's somebody that's so disconnected from the world, he's imploding and doesn't know it.
Destiny is weird. He had me on a while back and we discussed presidential immunity. We debated it and he was like, making all the terrible arguments that are out there. Well, like, couldn't the president just like murder a political opponent? It's like, well, I mean,
Barack Obama did that.
Yeah. Then Anwar al-Awlaki. It's like, well, he wasn't. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. But it's like, yes, but no. Like, it's not. There's a whole bunch of people involved, and they all have to determine that the order is legal and valid, and then do it. It's like, if Trump's like, we're going to take out this elementary school full of children. Look, they're all Al-Qaeda. They've been hiding underground and we're going to bomb them. The guy who's dropping the bombs, like, that's a bunch of kids though. Like, I don't know if I want to do that. People have to make those moral decisions. People are not automatons. I think everybody after Nuremberg is thinking, well, people always submit to authority. It's like, well, no, the system has to be generated to basically, create the authoritarian response, and it does work, and that happens to some degree. But when an act becomes so morally heinous and so legally questionable, just because Joe Biden or Donald Trump says, yeah, we're going to go kill the Trumps, like, that's not just going to automatically happen from SEAL Team 6. It's much more efficient for Joe Biden to pay some random guy to try and kill a political opponent than to actually send SEAL Team 6 out. That would be the better option for most people.
Well, the other thing I kept pointing out to people was like, what do you think war is? It's always declaring the right to kill one's political opponent. Exactly. So the only question is whether it's an acceptable political opponent to kill. But we've already greenlit the president killing his political opponents. It's only which political opponents it's okay to kill.
Right. But the at the end of the day, there has to be the political will for the assassination to be valid. Right. And if you don't like the assassination, the answer is impeachment. And it's right there in Federalist whatever. Hamilton writes specifically about how strong the president's protection should be, and that impeachment is always the answer. But we're scared to impeach presidents. They weren't scared to impeach Trump, but we're scared to impeach them, generally speaking, because it takes a massive amount of political capital to go against someone who's so damn popular. But that's what we want. That's what we created.
Well, I think the Supreme Court would have been better off saying impeachment as would remove immunity, but as the precondition for removing immunity, than just giving them immunity no matter what. Because
I agree. I think
the judiciary wants the power to decide when to take away the immunity, not Congress.
And I think that's actually what's written in the Constitution. I think that if the proper read says absent immunity or absent impeachment, it's like, or following impeachment is you can convict, but impeachment is not a criminal trial. I think that implies immunity is now stripped, but you still have to get your beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yep.
Cat Randall says, find your middle ground. Kevin Hunt says, a skinny cokehead and a fat pork chop. Is that defamation? I love you both, but a super chat, troll chat. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Brian Hack says, officer, I wash my face with American beer. It's got alcohol, so it's a disinfectant. I swear, Ossifer, it's my German accent. Road beers for all. George Lopez says, how do we fix the legal corruption? You fight it.
Institutional reform and more power in the hands of ordinary people than any politician.
And really, one of the biggest threats to legal corruption is people being empowered to stand up, told you can stand up, and provided the resources to stand up when they choose to. I'm talking about so many people cannot afford to fight, but we have the ability to democratize justice just like everything else. GoFundMes and stuff for people who are really struggling to pay their attorneys, who don't have the means to do it, but have that case. Get out there and support them, because those cases and the standing up against legal corruption, standing up against the government is inherently terrifying to government agents. They don't know what to do when people fight. Kevin Hunt says, Alex Jones was right, said JD Vance. Damariel Alinar says, what I find sad is a huge number of people which openly wish the guy would succeed. No empathy, not even for Donald, but even for a few people who were involved. And Fletcher Boy says, Nancy Pelosi is Lucille Bluth. Changed my mind. Nancy Pelosi is just hit. How many children's blood transfusions has she had?
She's the greatest stock picker in the history of man.
It's almost like she could pick stocks and then regulate the industries that to make them work. JD McWiggle says, your hate chats are as unhinged as unbreaded. Read those and make it a show. And that's what we've got.
Sweet.
Any last words, man? This has been a great show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I think, the ordinary people can keep the faith. You look at how President Trump has responded to all these efforts of intimidation, these efforts to crush his spirit and to crush his movement. And the ultimately resulting in an attempted assassination. And his response has been to double down on more freedom, more liberty, the right people that would advocate for those positions. So that if you stand up for your beliefs, often just being that one guy in front of the tank, it may not change the world today, but it often does do tomorrow. So keep the right mindset, keep the right mentality, and you can make the right difference that can make things better for you and yours in the future.
There you go. Wise words. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out. Check out Viva Barnes Law at locals.com. Also check out 1776lawcenter.com. Follow Barnes on Twitter, everywhere else. You know him, you love him. He's brilliant, and he's never afraid to say it. All right, guys, have a good night. Peace. Peace.